Chapter 133. Mo Tinga withdrew her aura and breath, ended her cultivation, and opened her eyes. Divine sense was born from one's primordial spirit. If one didn't deliberately cultivate it, one's primordial spirit would slowly strengthen along with one's cultivation level. The divine sense of a person with a high cultivation level would naturally be powerful. If one's cultivation level reached the core formation or nascent soul realm, their divine sense could also cause harm. However, this kind of harm was produced with the spiritual aura pressure. It was extremely effective against low-level cultivators, but it had no effect on cultivators in the same realm. However, the first layer of the soul refining art could cause fatal harm to cultivators in the same realm. On the other hand, the second layer of the soul refining art allowed the cultivator to exert pressure on cultivators of the same cultivation realm. If this was the case, her opponent would be constantly suppressed in a battle of magical powers. Even if they were extremely powerful, they would only be able to display 60 to 70% of their full strength. After experiencing the power of the soul refining art, her cultivation focus now shifted to the soul refining art. After going through the 5 spirits body cultivation method, her meridians were tough and her spiritual aura was stable, so she wouldn't be possessed by the devil again. Cultivating this art was many times faster than others, so it would be a loss if she didn't cultivate it. In the past 2 years in the virtual sky world, Mo Tinga had finished cultivating the first layer of this art and could use her divine sense to attack. Now, she was starting to cultivate the second layer. If she completed the second layer, she would be able to directly exert pressure on other people's divine senses, which would allow her to seize the initiative in fights of magical powers. At the same time, the second layer of the soul refining art could also make her resist the spiritual aura pressure of high-level cultivators. However, Gujin sect people probably came very quickly. The second layer of the soul refining art had just started, so it probably wouldn't have any effect in this fight. As soon as Mo Tinga finished thinking, she felt a furious spiritual aura pressure filling the entire sky above Qianmen Ridge. Mo Tinga's whole body trembled. This was at least a middle-stage core formation cultivator. Had Gujin sect people already arrived? She summoned the white silk handkerchief and flew to the sky outside the house. There, she saw a middle-aged sword cultivator wearing Gujin sect clothes standing on top of the gate of Qianmen Ridge Station with a long sword on his back. At the same time, Senior Marshal Brother Kuang Zhu flew towards the gate of Qianmen Ridge Station on an ever-changing white cloud. Upon seeing this, Mo Tinga hurriedly rode the white silk handkerchief to approach the gate. Aside from Yi Jingwen and Zhan Bai, the other foundation building cultivators of Xianqing School also approached Kuangzhu. The other cultivators of the 7 major sects watched from afar. Kuangzhu stopped in front of Qianmen Ridge's main gate. He cupped his fists and said, "Reverend Lu Feng has come from afar. Please forgive me for not going out to meet you." Reverend Lu Feng suppressed his anger and asked, "You are Kuangzhu?" Facing Taoist Master Liu Feng's question, which was filled with pressure and anger, Kuangzhu answered calmly, "Yes, I am. Since that's the case, hand over the other accomplices who murdered the 7 foundation building cultivators of my Gujin sect." Kuangzhu showed a faint smile. It seemed that Taoist Master Lu Feng had come to handle this matter in his capacity as the sect master. Thereupon, he said, "No murder has occurred in Qianmen Ridge Station. May I know who the accomplice is that sect master Du is referring to?" Mo Tinga, who was standing on the side, was extremely astonished. Gujin sect's sect head actually came here in person. Apparently, today's matter couldn't be settled peacefully. Taoist Master Lu Feng was furious. My Gujin sect had 7 foundation building cultivators in total in Qianmen Ridge Station. My sect's disciples personally saw Wan Hangan and the other 4 foundation building cultivators perish right after they entered the main hall. The whereabouts of the other 2 foundation building cultivators are also unknown. Manager Kuang, how are you going to explain this matter to my Gujin sect? Kuang Zhu still looked calm and elegant. Presumably, Gujian's sect's disciples didn't report this matter clearly. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to explain it to them. Then Kuang Zhu pointed at the main hall that had been razed to the ground and said, "This place used to be the main hall. Taoist, Master Lu Feng, may I ask if you can sense what happened here?" The blood-refined aura of the Thousand Shapes Azura formation wouldn't completely disperse in less than 3 to 5 months. So Taoist Master Liu Feng's expression changed after just a sweep of his divine sense. Kuang Zhu stopped smiling and asked, "If it weren't for my magic tool, which happened to be able to stop the Thousand Shapes Azura formation from taking shape, and if it weren't for my junior martial sister who was good at arranging formations and using the formation's illusory beast to kill the culprit, one Hangan, inside the formation, sect head, Du wouldn't have been able to collect the corpses of the other disciples of Gujian's sect, let alone denouncing me." Before Taoist Master Lu Feng could answer, Kuang Zhu continued, "The disciples who launched the Thousand Shapes Azura formation seem to be regarded as Gujian's sect's traitors. Sect head Du, may I ask, during this chaotic demonic beast war, what should the disciples of the 7 great cultivation groups do when they appear in Kunwu Alliance's station? Not to mention that launching the Thousand Shapes Azura formation required at least 3 blood mediums. Even if the formation master was lucky enough to survive, he would become a devil cultivator and his cultivation level would be greatly reduced. This formation was completely a formation that would perish together with the enemy." However, Kuang Zhu didn't talk about why Gujian's sect's disciples launched the Thousand Shapes Azura formation. Instead, he directly pointed to what happened after the Thousand Shapes Azura formation was launched. No matter how much Taoist Master Lu Feng reprimanded him, Kuang Zhu had already pushed the dead disciples of Gujian's sect to the opposite side of everyone in Qianmen Ridge Station, so Taoist Master Lu Feng couldn't make things difficult for him. Taoist Master Liu Feng's face turned from red to white, then from white to green. In the end, he said indignantly, "You killed all the foundation-building disciples of my Gujian sect who participated in this matter, so you naturally wanted to silence them. I don't know what despicable method you used to actually lure my Gujian sect's disciples into using the Thousand Shapes Azura formation, but I won't be confused by your lies. Since I can't explain it clearly, I might as well fight." Once he said that, all the foundation-building disciples of Xianxing School took out their magic tools. Kuang Zhu was the only one who remained calm. Not to mention that it was sect head Du's disciples who broke the rules. Does sect head Du plan to kill all the disciples of the 7 great cultivation groups in Qianmen Ridge? Just as Taoist Master Lu Feng was about to say something, a magnificent voice accompanied by a frightening spiritual aura pressure came from afar. "Sect head Du, you might as well kill me too." The nervous-looking Xianxing School disciples were instantly overjoyed. Some of them even shouted, "It's Grandmaster Jinghe." Before their shouts died down, a cloud chariot, surrounded by 8 foundation-building female cultivators wearing cloud-colored clothes and holding palace lanterns, was heading towards the gate of Qianmen Ridge Station at lightning speed. This ostentatious style of a fatuous ruler was naturally none other than Xianxing School's Lord Taoist Jinghe. After the incident, the 1,000-mile sound-transmitting talismans from both sides were sent at almost the same time. Compared to Xianxing School, Gujian sect was a bit further away from Qianmen Ridge, so Lord Taoist Jinghe should have set off right after he received the sound-transmitting talisman, but he only arrived now. Presumably, the speed of the cloud chariot was hindered by those female cultivators. Kuang Zhu's usually calm face seemed to be a bit gloomy as he watched the cloud chariot leisurely moving under the escort of female cultivators. The magnificent cloud chariot paid no attention to these people's gazes. The 8 female cultivators beside the cloud chariot were presumably also experienced people. They actually put away their palace lanterns with smiles on their faces and took out identical flower baskets from their chinquan bags. Under everyone's gazes, they scattered fragrant flower petals from the air as if they were performing. When the flower petals completely covered the ground, the cloud chariot slowly landed on the ground. Everyone watched as 2 maids pulled up the gold-painted curtain in front of the cloud chariot. A middle-aged man wearing a golden crown and a king's robe, full of nobility, was sitting inside the cloud chariot, casually glancing at the people in front of him. Some people might have thought this cloud chariot was too ostentatious before, but now that they saw the master of the cloud chariot, they felt this ostentatious display wasn't excessive at all. In the end, Lord Taoist Jinghe stared at Master Lu Feng, who looked as if he was facing a formidable enemy, and smiled amiably. Your Gujian sect advocates the supremacy of force, but our Xianxing school is a Dao school. Dao schools naturally have to be reasonable. All the Xianxing school disciples were greatly embarrassed. Our Dao is the Dao of unity with the heavenly Dao. It's the Dao of balance. What does this have to do with reason? Besides, this Grandmaster Jinghe has always been a bloodthirsty person. Has he ever been reasonable? Lord Taoist Jinghe didn't wait for Master Lu Feng to answer. He turned to Yi Jingwen and said, Jingwen brat, it'd be better if you tell me the whole story. I can also properly reason with sect head Du. Yi Jingwen first glanced at Guangzhu. Guangzhu nodded. Yi Jingwen then looked at Mo Tienge. Mo Tienge said, Big brother Yi, just tell me the truth. Yi Jingwen naturally wouldn't be stupid enough to tell the truth, so he could only optimize the story they discussed. He cupped his hands and said, Grandmaster, this matter has to start from when Junior Marshal's sister Mo arrived at Qianmen Ridge Station. Lord Taoist Jinghe said carelessly, There's no harm in telling me the details. A few days ago, Junior Marshal's sister Mo, who went missing during the battle at Danding School, finally recovered from her injuries and found her Qianmen Ridge Station. Senior Marshal Brother Quang arranged a place for Junior Marshal's sister Mo to rest and then assigned her a mission to leave the station. Because Junior Marshal's sister Mo was new here and the demonic beast war in the past 2 years caused a lot of changes, Junior Marshal's sister Mo decided to take a look around after she accepted the mission. Because of what happened that year, most people in the station didn't know Junior Marshal's sister Mo. Moreover, I was also carrying out a mission outside and hadn't returned yet, so Junior Marshal's sister Mo had no choice but to leave the station alone. Wan Hongan from Gujian's sect took advantage of this, so he and 2 other early-stage foundation building disciples from Gujian's sect followed Junior Marshal's sister Mo out of the station with ill intentions. That day, I finished my mission and happened to be returning from outside the station. When I was about to reach the station, I suddenly sensed some people ganging up on Xianxing school cultivators. When I arrived, Wan Hongan and the others from Gujian's sect bullied the Major General and surrounded Junior Marshal's sister Mo. At first, Yi Jingwen still felt a bit guilty because he was lying, but now, because he was the one who was involved and Mo Tienge was merely his name, he was furious. Therefore, the more he spoke, the more vivid and the more resentful he became. He vividly described the ugliness of those people who wanted to molest Junior Marshal's sister Mo, then kill her to seize her treasures. On the other side, Mo Tienge, whose head was hanging lower and lower, thought, Senior Marshal Brother Yi, these people who were ganged up on and beaten up like this have nothing to do with me. When he saw that everyone in the hall was starting to look angry, Yi Jingwen promptly adjusted the plot to the part where Mo Tienge fought back and, with his assistance, launched a desperate struggle against several cultivators from Gujian's sect. Furthermore, Wan Hongan even sacrificed his fellow disciple and escaped back to their station. Yi Jingwen also clearly explained the matter of Wan Hongan sacrificing his fellow disciple and escaping back to their station. When he reached this point, Lord Taoist Jinghe's face was already filled with anger. According to Yi Jingwen's story, the several cultivators from Gujian's sect who died in the main hall would probably also be portrayed as heinous criminals. Guangzhu was still quite afraid this grandmaster of his would start massacre. So he interrupted Yi Jingwen and said, I'll explain what happened next. Everyone heard Guangzhu's calm and elegant voice continue. After 2 of his fellow disciples died, this one Hongan came back and instigated several other Gujian sect disciples to come to the main hall and frame Junior Marshal's sister Mo. He even proposed that if Junior Marshal's sister Mo married him, he'd take responsibility for the deaths of his 2 fellow disciples in front of the elders of Gujian's sect. Junior Marshall's sister, Mo, was surrounded outside the station by him before, so she had a deep understanding of this person's maliciousness, so she naturally wouldn't believe his words. I believe everyone in Qianmen Ridge Station should also know that Wan Hong'an's temperament isn't righteous. After his true colors were exposed by Junior Marshall's sister, Mo, the senior Marshall brothers of Gujian's sect naturally wouldn't help him when he abandoned his fellow disciples. This person saw that the matter was exposed and the deaths of his two fellow disciples would also be blamed on him, so he launched the Thousand Shapes Azura formation, intending to kill us and the senior Marshall brothers of Gujian's sect in the main hall. When we just entered the main hall, several senior Marshall brothers of Gujian's sect were too impulsive and started a small fight with us. Wan Hong'an plotted to use them as blood mediums. If it wasn't because my medicinal cloud just happened to have the effect of preventing the Azura formation from taking shape, Qianmen Ridge Station would have been filled with resentful souls. It's just a pity that those senior Marshall brothers of Gujian sect died unjustly. Guangzhu heaved a long sigh, sounding very regretful. Ultimately, Yi Jingwen didn't plan on letting Wan Hong'an go from the beginning, and Guangzhu wasn't a soft-hearted person either, so he deliberately used his words to infuriate the foundation-building cultivators of Gujian's sect. However, the other cultivators of Gujian's sect who died in the main hall did indeed die rather unjustly, so Guangzhu's words could be considered to have cleared their names. Lord Taoist Jinghe, who'd always been irascible, let out a cold humph after he heard the whole story. He raised his hand and blasted a big hole in the main hall that was razed to the ground by Wan Hong'an's explosion. The remaining power greatly shocked everyone present. Some of the aura-refining disciples with slightly weaker cultivations even had blood trickling down the corners of their mouths. At the same time, Lord Taoist Jinghe said furiously, "Is my Lord Taoist Jinghe's last disciple someone you can casually take liberties with?" Mo Tiange raised her head in astonishment. She quickly glanced at Lord Taoist Jinghe, then looked at Yi Jingwen. Yi Jingwen also looked at Mo Tiange with astonishment written all over his face. Although he already knew Mo Tiange was Lord Taoist Jinghe's registered disciple, the difference between last disciple and registered disciple was like the difference between heaven and earth. Registered disciples would at most pay attention to them when they remembered. Although they naturally had more benefits than ordinary disciples, they lacked a proper master to take care of them, so their cultivation path would be much more difficult. Becoming a last disciple wasn't as simple as becoming an official disciple. Most of the last disciples were also direct disciples because they felt it was enough to have such a disciple. The master would naturally focus on teaching the last disciple and would naturally give them all kinds of good things. With Lord Taoist Jinghe's words, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say Mo Tiange had reached the sky in a single bound. At that moment, Lord Taoist Jinghe was facing the sect head of Gujian's sect. He released his spiritual aura pressure and said angrily, "You actually wanted to use people's lives to force me to marry a female disciple of my sect? Even if you had several lives, it wouldn't be enough. Since the person is already dead, I won't start killing today. However, in the end, it's your Gujian sect that isn't strict. Du Lufeng, go back and tell old Taoist Fuling that if he doesn't want me to kill my way to your sect, he has to give me a good explanation." Once he finished speaking, Lord Taoist Jinghe turned around and looked at Mo Tiange sternly. He called out, "Tiange." Although Mo Tiange was still shocked, she wouldn't hope this Lord Taoist could dispel her doubts in front of everyone. She hurriedly lowered her head and answered, "Disciple is here. This kind of unscrupulous and shameless person should die a quick death. 2 years ago, you even dared to lure a 5th-ranked demonic beast by yourself, but you actually didn't dare to kill this kind of scoundrel on the spot. As my disciple, you're really shameful. Today, you should follow me back to the mountain for closed-door meditation." Although Lord Taoist Jinghe spoke harshly, he actually said can't as don't dare. Moreover, he used the 5th-ranked demonic beast as a bait, making people easily believe that Gujian sect was being overbearing because Xianqing school was being lenient. Compared to Yi Jingwen's cumbersome narration, Lord Taoist Jinghe's words were more convincing, and he was even more skillful in acting like a rogue. Soon after, Lord Taoist Jinghe reprimanded Yi Jingwen. Yi Jingwen, you've been away from the mountain for some time, but you actually haven't made any progress. It's time for you to go back and listen to your master's teachings. After he finished speaking, he grabbed Mo Tinga and Mo Tinga into the cloud carriage. When the cloud carriage slowly rose into the sky, Lord Taoist Jinghe sneered and said, "This matter has been explained clearly, but Sect Head Du and your fellow martial brothers still haven't arrived. Presumably, they won't be able to make it. If Sect Head Du doesn't want to collect their corpses, you should hurry back to rescue them." Upon hearing what he said, Master Taoist Liufeng's expression changed greatly. He originally thought the bloodthirsty Lord Taoist Jinghe actually said something like, "I won't start a massacre today," and thought the heavens were looking after him. Who would have thought that Lord Taoist Jinghe had already vented his anger on the way here? They originally came to deal with the foundation building cultivators. If they lost a few core formation cultivators' lives because of this, Gujin sect would probably end up as miserable as Danding School, whose foundation was destroyed by demonic beasts. Master Taoist Lu Feng naturally didn't dare to linger. By the time Lord Taoist Jinghe finished speaking, he was already gone. After the cloud carriage rose into the sky, Lord Taoist Jinghe once again shouted, "Guangzhu." Guangzhu hurriedly answered, "Disciple is here. I'll give this to you as a reward. If those ignorant people from Gujin sect come looking for us again, beat them up and kick them out. You can't be lenient." The female cultivator next to the cloud carriage took a medicine bowl from the carriage, then stepped on a flower basket and floated to Guangzhu's side. After presenting the medicine bowl to Guangzhu, she gracefully flew back to the side of the cloud carriage. Lord Taoist Jinghe's voice, which no longer contained any anger, came from inside the cloud carriage. "This bowl is called the Heaven Mixing Bowl, and the medicinal pestle inside, it is called the Earth-Splitting Pestle. One for offense and the other for defense. They complement each other, and they can even strengthen the medicinal properties of spiritual plants. It's most suitable for you." Right after that, the female cultivator next to the cloud carriage took a dress from inside the carriage. Lord Taoist Jinghe said from inside the cloud carriage, "This 100 fragrances gorgeous dress is for your family Xiao Bai. A girl should look like a girl. Is it interesting to dress like a man all day long? This lord hates this kind of thing the most." All the Xianqing school disciples widened their eyes when they heard what he said. In an instant, Zhanbai became the focus of everyone's attention. This time, everyone saw senior marshal brother Guangzhu's face, which had always been calm and collected, darkened. The female cultivator next to the cloud carriage gave the 100 fragrances gorgeous dress to Zhan, by then left Xianmen Ridge Station with Lord Taoist Jinghe's cloud carriage. All the Xianqing school disciples watched as Grandmaster Jinghe left. They then turned their heads to look at Zhanbai again, but then they heard senior marshal brother Guangzhu, who wasn't very quiet, roar, "Where are you looking at? All of you go back." He then pulled Zhanbai away. Chapter 134. Mo Tinga stood inside the carriage, listening to the whistling sound of the wind. She kept her eyes on her nose and her nose on her heart, standing motionlessly and obediently. Yi Jingwen had also practiced this set of etiquette to the point of perfection, so he didn't make the slightest mistake. The two of them were like statues, perfectly embodying the image of obedient good disciples. Lord Taoist Jinghe stared at the two of them for a while. Seeing as neither of them had any intention of taking the initiative to explain anything, he slowly took out a cup of steaming hot tea. Lord Taoist Jinghe didn't know where he got this tea in his flying cloud carriage. Mo Tinga and Yi Jingwen didn't make a sound, and Lord Taoist Jinghe didn't say anything either. There was only the steaming tea in the cloud carriage. Aside from the sound of Lord Taoist Jinghe drinking tea, there was no other sound. Lord Taoist Jinghe only breathed a sigh of contentment when the cup of tea was finished and threw it outside. Mo Tinga immediately thought that if there happened to be a cultivator below, would his head be smashed? But when she heard Grandmaster Jinghe's voice in the next second, she immediately collected her scattered thoughts. I say, Lord Taoist Jinghe leaned against the back of the chair and stared at the two of them indifferently. Do you really think I'm someone you can fool? Although he didn't release his spiritual aura pressure, a drop of cold sweat dripped from Yi Jingwen's forehead. He knelt down and said, Grand Disciple is incompetent. Please forgive us, Grandmaster. Mo Tinga's alarm clock was still full of Lord Taoist Jinghe's words about last disciple just now. She was still having some random thoughts, so she didn't think about this at all. However, when she saw Yi Jingwen's reaction, she immediately reacted and also knelt down with clenched teeth. Lord Taoist Jinghe snorted softly, then suddenly roared at the two kneeling people. Little brats, do you think I don't know anything? You really have guts. Not only did you kill 7 foundation building cultivators in one go, but you also hoped that I, your Grandmaster, would help you solve this matter. But now, you actually want to take advantage of me, your Grandmaster? As he roared angrily, the spiritual aura pressure of a nascent soul cultivator spread. Mo Tinga, who was originally reluctant, felt her whole body couldn't move when this spiritual aura pressure touched her. She was firmly pressed to the ground. Moreover, his forehead was drenched in cold sweat, and the spiritual energy in his body was surging. He was actually unable to control it. However, in the next moment, they heard Lord Taoist Jinghe's light voice again. But in the end, you're my disciple, Lord Taoist Jinghe. How could I let people come knocking on my door at will? His tone was full of complacency and complacency. Mo Tinga was stunned. What kind of play is this? She thought even though Lord Taoist Jinghe was proud of himself, he'd still publicly reprimand them, then give them rewards. She never expected him to be so direct. Yi Jingwen was the first to react. He immediately said, Grandmaster is right. Grand Disciple also thinks so. These Gujian sect cultivators were really shameless. How could they let them bully them? However, we also can't let those old men of Gujian sect ruin Grandmaster's reputation. So Grand Disciples and the others decided to act on their own. These words made Mo Tinga sweat once again. She had just realized Big Brother Yi was quite long-winded, but she never knew Yi Jingwen could actually be so flowery. Not only did he push all the blame away, but he also made it sound like they were thinking about Grandmaster. Lord Taoist Jinghe, on the other hand, enjoyed it very much. He laughed heartily while stroking his short beard. Not bad, not bad. You're quite clever. Although I know you're not telling the truth. I like you, so I won't argue with you. Yi Jingwen heaved a sigh of relief, and Mo Tinga's body also felt lighter. He had finally passed this stage, but the two of them shuddered again. They saw Lord Taoist Jinghe looking at them with a profound gaze. This matter of yours is to my liking, but you're too daring. In order to stop others from talking, from today onwards, you'll be in seclusion at Clear Spring Peak for 10 years. Within 10 years, you're not allowed to go out without orders. Do you hear me? They weren't allowed to leave Mount Taikong for 10 years, so under Grandmaster Jinghe's protection, outsiders naturally wouldn't dare to do anything to them. Grandmaster Jinghe was deliberately letting them off. Both Mo Tinga and Yi Jingwen were delighted. They glanced at each other, then prostrated on the ground with sincerity. Thank you, Grandmaster. Yes. Lord Taoist Jinghe's eyes were still closed, but he raised one of his eyes and cast a glance at Mo Tinga. Why are you still calling me Grandmaster? Mo Tinga was stunned. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. What's wrong with that? Lord Taoist Jinghe snorted. Do you think my words are all farts? Since you're my last disciple, you naturally don't need to address me like that. Mo Tinga was really dumbfounded this time. She just thought Grandmaster Jinghe said it as a stopgap measure for other people to hear. Did he really think she was his last disciple? What? Lord Taoist Jinghe glanced at her. His words were full of intimidation. Don't tell me you still don't want to be my disciple. Mo Tinga blinked. Before she could come back to her senses, Yi Jingwen bumped into her and whispered, Why are you in a daze? Quickly kowtow. Mo Tinga kowtowed in panic. Disciple. Disciple kowtows in salute to master. What was this? She had seen deification cultivators before, so she wouldn't be scared to death by Grandmaster Jinghe. However, she really couldn't adapt to the way this Grandmaster handled things, and Lord Taoist Jinghe nodded with satisfaction. That's more like it. Master is very unhappy now, so there's no master-disciple ceremony. Do you have any objections? No. Did she dare to have any objections? She was merely a foundation-building cultivator without any foundation, yet she could be accepted as the last disciple of a middle-stage nascent soul cultivator. What kind of glory was that? Even core formation cultivators would fight to the death for it. How could she have any objections? She was just a bit worried. This Grandmaster had a strange character and wasn't easy to get along with. Tinga's heart was in turmoil. Before she could figure out what was going on, she heard Lord Taoist Jinghe's humph. At that moment, Tinga and Yi Jingwen trembled, feeling a strong spiritual aura pressure. Tinga was now very experienced. As soon as this spiritual aura pressure appeared, she knew it should be the spiritual aura pressure of a nascent soul cultivator. Another nascent soul cultivator actually appeared. At that moment, Lord Taoist Jinghe raised the corners of his lips and snorted coldly. You want to pressure me with this little trick? With a wave of his sleeve, a barrier appeared out of thin air, protecting the cloud carriage so that not even a drop of water could leak through. Right after that, he clasped his hands together, and an astonishing momentum appeared. Unexpectedly, Tinga and Yi Jingwen were still in the foundation-building realm inside the carriage, and they were also very close to Lord Taoist Jinghe. Once Lord Taoist Jinghe used this move, the two of them instantly vomited blood and fainted inside the carriage. Lord Taoist Jinghe frowned. This was the first time his carriage encountered an enemy with someone inside, so he actually overlooked this point. Lord Taoist Jinghe muttered in a very bad mood. Really useless. Right after he said that, he stopped the cloud carriage, lifted the gold-lined curtain, and went out. When Tinga woke up, she felt as if her body was trapped in a cloud. She couldn't exert force in any part of her body. She couldn't even open her eyes, and her meridians were also aching faintly. Just as Tinga was about to move, she heard a woman's voice saying softly, "Martial Uncle this is Grandmaster's Wenyang Pool. Just now, we encountered an enemy on the road, and Grandmaster accidentally injured you. When Grandmaster came back, he brought you here and told us to take good care of you. Martial Uncle, do you feel uncomfortable anywhere?" Tinga thought to herself, "My whole body feels uncomfortable, but it's hard for me to even speak." Soon after, another woman's voice said, "Mengzhu, Martial Uncle woke up. Help Martial Uncle take the medicinal pills Grandmaster left behind." Tinga felt someone passing a medicinal pill to her lips. It took her a lot of effort to open her mouth, but she found she didn't even have the strength to swallow. The previous woman said, "Martial Uncle, I'm sorry." Then someone pinched her lower jaw and forced the medicinal pill into her body. Once the medicinal pill entered her body, its medicinal power spread along her meridians, and her aching meridians felt a lot more comfortable. However, the medicinal effect couldn't be compared to the medicinal herbs gathered by the Inferno Beast in the virtual sky world. Tinga frowned. While she was doing her best to absorb the medicinal power, she felt extremely unlucky. In the battle of demonic beasts, she had to provoke a 5th-rank demonic beast. If it wasn't for her 5 spirits cultivation body and her virtual sky world, she would have died a long time ago. She finally healed with great difficulty and met up with her fellow disciples. But then she encountered Big Brother Yi being ganged up on. Because of this incident, she was accepted as an advanced inner disciple by a nascent soul grandmaster. Who would have thought that before the title of advanced inner disciple could warm up, she would be seriously injured by her own master? How many advanced inner disciples in this world would be seriously injured by their own master right after they accepted him as a disciple? In all of West Kunwu, Tinga was probably the only one who was a weirdo. She really didn't know what kind of fate she had. After thinking about this, Tinga finally felt she had some strength. She struggled to ask, "Is Big Brother you alright?" Martial Uncle, Senior Martial Brother, Yi has been taken back to Clear Spring Peak by Martial Uncle Qing Yuan to heal his injuries. Grandmaster has already given him medicinal pills, so presumably he should be fine. Given, you're obviously the one who injured him, yet you still gave him... Imo Tinga felt very helpless when she felt the circle of people surrounding her. If she was still a registered disciple, she would have definitely been left to fend for herself. That way, she could enter the virtual sky world to heal her injuries. Whether it was medicinal plants or spiritual aura, it was many times better than the rewards bestowed by this master. With this thought in mind, Imo Tinga felt a lot better. In all of West Kunwu, she was probably the only one who dared to disdain the rewards bestowed by a middle-stage nascent soul master. However, Big Brother Yi was probably in a miserable state this time. Not to mention the damage to his meridians, his cultivation level might even regress. She didn't know whether she was the one who got him into trouble or whether she was the one who got into trouble with him. As she thought up to this point, Imo Tinga suddenly remembered another matter. "Why are you guys fine?" Imo Tinga remembered that the several female cultivators outside the cloud carriage were also in the foundation building realm like her. How could they still have the ability to take care of her when she and Yi Jingwen were seriously injured? Reporting to Uncle Master, the 8 of us are protected by the formation that comes with the cloud carriage, so no matter how earth-shattering the battle between Grandmaster and others is, it won't affect us. However, Grandmaster is usually the only one in the cloud carriage, and Uncle Master and Senior Brother Yi are close to each other. That's why we're implicated. Before Imo Tinga could slander them, she heard the female voice say, "Riding in the same carriage with Grandmaster is such a rare honor. If word of this spread, countless fellow disciples would be envious of us. Moreover, Grandmaster really didn't do it on purpose, so I hope Martial Uncle won't take it to heart." Imo Tinga thought to herself, "You guys ride the same carriage every day, but I don't see how many people would be envious of you." However, she heard a slightly sarcastic female voice say, "Senior Martial's sister Mengzhu, I'm afraid it's not up to you to explain whether Martial Uncle takes it to heart or not." In such an impolite tone made Imo Tinga a bit dumbfounded. "What's going on?" At that moment, the female cultivator called Mengzhu changed her gentle tone and snorted coldly. "I'm talking to Martial Uncle Imo. Why do you need to interrupt?" The female cultivator who ridiculed Mengzhu became even more annoyed when she heard her reply. She sneered and said, "Grandmaster told us to serve Martial Uncle Imo together, not just Senior Martial's sister. Why can't I interrupt?" Junior Martial's sister Rulin. Mengzhu's voice suddenly became a lot stricter. "Are you the Senior Martial's sister, or am I the Senior Martial's sister?" Rulin paused for a moment, then said reluctantly, "Of course you're the Senior Martial's sister." Mengzhu's slightly arrogant voice once again returned. "Since I'm the Senior Martial's sister, it's naturally up to me to speak." After she said that, the scene became quiet for a while. The woman called Rulin once again said angrily, "Even if you're the Senior Martial's sister now, so what? Who Grandmaster likes doesn't depend on the ranking." After listening up to this point, Imo Tinga finally understood. Could this be the legendary fight for a man's affection? Thinking about that unreliable Grandmaster Jinghe. Oh, he was now her master, as well as these beautiful female cultivators who were probably no more than 100 years old. She felt a chill run down her spine. Tao schools promoted purity of heart and few desires. Although dual cultivation was prohibited, very few of them liked to take concubines. Could it be that her new master was an exception? Mengzhu, Rulin, these names were really vulgar. Grandmaster Jinghe, who considered himself to be extraordinary, noble, and graceful, actually liked this kind of name. Would there be a plum or a chrysanthemum next? Just as this thought crossed her mind, she heard Mengzhu call out, "Shuangju, what's with your expression?" Imo Tinga almost vomited blood. Unfortunately, she didn't have any strength now. She could only keep a distorted expression on her face while doing her best to absorb the medicinal power so that she could regain control of her body as soon as possible. At the same time, She continued to listen to these female cultivators' verbal attacks. Senior Marshal Sister Mengzhu, I didn't say anything. Shuangju's voice was cold. It seemed she didn't want to get involved. Mengzhu sneered. You didn't say anything, but it's written all over your face. Shuangju didn't answer and remained silent for a while. Ruolin laughed contemptuously and said, Senior Marshal Sister Mengzhu, in terms of ranking, you're not the eldest. Why did you have to bully Shuangju? When did I bully her? Unconvinced, Mengzhu argued. I only asked her a question. What does she mean by ignoring me? Enough. Once Ruolin spoke, the female cultivator who rarely spoke said in a dignified manner, If I don't speak, you'll really think I'm just a decoration. What's the use of arguing about this? Grandmaster told us to take care of Marshal Uncle Mo. Aren't you afraid Marshal Uncle Mo will take offense at your words? Once she said that, everyone became silent for a while. Shuangju said, Senior Marshal Sister Mame, don't be angry. We'll stop talking. But right after she said that, Ruolin continued to say, Senior Marshal Sister Mame, you're so attentive in taking care of Marshal Uncle Mo. Don't tell me you want to use Marshal Uncle Mo to curry favor with Grandmaster. I'm just afraid you've miscalculated. Upon hearing that, Mo Tienga felt even more helpless. These people quarreled in front of her. Although they called her Marshal Uncle, they didn't show any respect. Weren't they just bullying her because she was a foundation-building cultivator? Lord Taoist Jinghe's way of controlling his subordinates really wasn't good. Chapter 135. After soaking in the Wenyang pool for a long time, Mo Tienga finally had the strength to open her eyes. She looked around and finally saw the appearance of the Wenyang pool clearly. It was a pool made of irregularly shaped warm jade. The water in the pool was milky white and emitted the smell of medicine she was already used to. The place where the pool was located was built to look like a high platform. The steps and the floor were all made of white jade and were decorated with carvings and paintings. It looked extremely luxurious. Gauze curtains were hung all around. When the wind blew, the gauze curtains would fly and countless petals would fall from the sky. The high platform was surrounded by a boundless sea of clouds. The whole platform looked like it was floating in the clouds. Mo Tienga didn't know where the Wenyang pool was built. While she was still lost in her thoughts, a maid called out in surprise, Marshal Uncle Mo, you're awake? Mo Tienga turned around and saw 4 building realm female cultivators standing behind her. All of them were beautiful and gentle. Presumably, they were Mei Lan, Zhu, and Zhu who were serving her while bickering. The one who asked the question was Mengzhu, who was the most talkative. Mo Tienga only nodded. Can I come out now? Mame answered, Since Marshal Uncle can move, you can naturally come out. Mo Tienga was about to get up when she suddenly realized she was naked. She couldn't help but feel a bit embarrassed and asked, Where are my clothes? Mei Lan, Zhu, and Zhu separated. 2 of them were clearly holding long towels, and the other 2 were holding clothes. It seemed they were going to serve her. Mo Tienga thought for a moment. They were all women, so she didn't act bashful anymore. When she came out of the pool, one of the 4 maids held her hair, one wiped her body, and the other 2 helped her dress. She didn't even need to move a finger to put on her clothes. Mo Tienga suddenly remembered a story she once read in the secular world. It said that in the distant past era, there was a dynasty that almost unified the celestial pole. That dynasty's emperor doted on a concubine, and the concubine liked to bathe in a hot spring. A poet wrote a long poem about this story. There was a line in the poem. In the cold of spring, she was bestowed a bath in the Huaqing pool. The hot spring water was smooth and congealed. The maid helped her up, delicate and powerless. It was the time when she had just received the emperor's grace. Mo Tienga subconsciously thought up to this point, and she suddenly felt goosebumps all over her body. Even if Lord Taoist Jinghe behaved like an incapable ruler, she was his disciple, not that hapless concubine. They were completely unrelated. Mo Tienga shook off her uneasiness, then turned around and asked, Should I go see Master now? Yes, Mengzhu replied. Marshal Aunt, please step onto the lotus platform. It was only then that Mo Tinga saw a floating lotus seat next to the high platform. She stepped onto the lotus platform, and the lotus platform slowly moved before slowly sinking down. Only now did she see clearly that this high platform was actually floating in midair. The lotus platform was slowly descending. Although it had nothing to rely on, it was steadily carrying her to the clear spring peak. Several breaths later, Mo Tinga set foot on clear spring peak. The lotus platform once again slowly rose to the sky. Mo Tinga watched as the lotus seat flew away. She then looked up and saw that this was Lord Taoist Jinghe's Immortal's Cave, which she once visited. Upon seeing her coming down from the lotus throne, the foundation building disciple guarding the door immediately walked towards her and greeted her enthusiastically. "Are you Martial Uncle Mo?" Mo Tinga nodded. These people were really quick-witted. She had just become an advanced inner disciple from a registered disciple. Yet the way they addressed her changed completely. The disciple immediately smiled and said, "Grandmaster told me that there's no need to report Martial Uncle Mo's arrival. Martial Uncle can go in now." Mo Tinga showed him a faint smile. "Thank you," while the disciple repeatedly said, "I don't dare." Mo Tinga stepped into the main hall. "Your injuries healed really fast. It's only been a few days, but you're already able to come out." Mo Tinga heard a voice before she even entered the hall. Mo Tinga looked up and saw Lord Taoist Jinghe sitting inside. She promptly knelt to greet him. "Disciple greets Master. Thank you for your trouble." Lord Taoist Jinghe waved his hand indifferently and said, "It's fine as long as you're still alive." How could she have any respect for this newly appointed master? "All right, get up. I'm not a master who treats disciples harshly, so you don't have to kneel at every turn. Just sit." Upon hearing this voice, Mo Tinga's face twitched, but she still stood up and obediently answered, "Yes." Lord Taoist Jinghe watched as she picked a chair and sat down. His gaze moved back and forth on her body. Sometimes he stroked his short beard in contemplation, and sometimes he stared at her and muttered to himself. Mo Tinga felt a bit restless under his gaze. "Is there a problem?" Lord Taoist Jinghe suddenly clapped his hands. "Right, why didn't I think of that?" As he spoke, he turned to Mo Tinga. "Since you're my official disciple, I'll grant you a new Immortal's Cave." Xiuqin, the female cultivator standing next to him, answered, "Yes." "Take her to Mingxin residence." "Yes, Grandmaster." The female cultivator bowed, then said to Mo Tinga, "Martial Uncle Mo, please follow me." "Oh." Mo Tinga saluted Grandmaster Jinghe again, then followed the female cultivator out of the side door. Lord Taoist Jinghe's Immortal's Cave could almost be called an imperial palace, but it was a palace built inside a mountain. Inside, there were countless pavilions, terraces, and strange plants everywhere. Mo Tinga had never seen such a gorgeous and extravagant Immortal's Cave, so she couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Even cultivators were different. There were those who cultivated painstakingly, and there were also people like Lord Taoist Jinghe who loved to enjoy life. If mortals saw this Immortal's Cave, they'd definitely think it was a paradise, right? She passed through the moon door, walked through the veranda, and finally went around to a small courtyard. This small courtyard was completely different from other buildings. Although it was made of jade steps and stone walls, it was very simple. Aside from necessities, there were no luxurious decorations. There were 5 small rooms in a row. The maid named Xiuqin introduced them one by one. "Martial Uncle Mo, there's a small hall in the middle where you can receive guests. This is a cultivation room. This is a concocting room. This is a tool refining room. This is a resting room. Also, if you have spiritual beasts, you could build a nest outside. This medicinal field was originally planted by Martial Uncle Xiujing, but it'll be yours in the future." Mo Tinga was dumbfounded. "Who originally lived here?" The maid answered with a smile. "This was Martial Uncle Xiujing's childhood residence. It was only after he formed his gold core that Grandmaster gave him another Immortal's Cave." Mo Tinga looked around. The pond in front of the house and the medicinal field behind the house didn't need to use moonstones because they brought in sunlight. She stepped into the small hall and saw a simple mahogany table and chairs by the wall. Aside from the tea set on the table, there was nothing else, not even a plaything. Mo Tienga originally thought the things here were taken away by the original owner, but when she walked around to the cultivation room, she saw 2 bookshelves by the wall filled with books, jade slips, and other old things. Xiuqin explained, after Martial Uncle Shoujing moved away, he didn't take these things with him. Then should we move now? Xiuqin paused. Let me report this to Grandmaster first. The 2 of them walked out of the cultivation room and saw a female cultivator walking in. She bowed to Mo Tienga and said, Martial Uncle Mo, Grandmaster ordered me to deliver a message. Mo Tienga nodded. Please speak. The maid said, Grandmaster said from now on, this place will belong to Martial Uncle. You don't need to report any items here. You can use them yourself. In addition, after Martial Uncle stays here, you don't need to see Grandmaster anymore. You can cultivate with peace of mind. If Grandmaster has something to do, he'll summon Martial Uncle. Such a long message could be summed up in 4 words. Live and die on your own. Mo Tienga naturally didn't expect Lord Daoist Jinghe to attach great importance to her, so she didn't feel disappointed. She just nodded and said, I understand. Thank Grandmaster on my behalf. The maid once again bowed lightly and retreated. Xiuqin looked at the direction the maid left in and said with a smile, Congratulations, Martial Uncle. Martial Uncle Shoujing left a lot of good things here. From now on, they'll belong to Martial Uncle. Mo Tienga didn't answer. She just asked, I want to tidy up the things in the original Immortal's cave. Can I go out? Of course, Xiuqin said. Xiuqin said, Martial Uncle, please come with me. We always take this path when we leave the Immortal's cave. Martial Uncle, just recognize the way and be at ease in the future. The 2 of them walked through many twists and turns before they came out of side hall. Xiuqin said to the gatekeeping disciple, This is Martial Uncle Mo. From now on, she'll live here. The gatekeeping disciple was also a foundation-building cultivator. Upon hearing what Xiuqin said, he didn't dare to neglect her and saluted Mo Tienga. Martial Uncle Mo Tienga had been called that for several days, so she was already used to it. She no longer nervously returned the salute like she did in the beginning. She just nodded naturally and asked, I'm going out for a while. Is that okay? The gatekeeping disciple said, Since Martial Uncle lives here, you can naturally go in and out at will. Mo Tienga turned towards Xiuqin and said, I'm going to tidy up the Immortal's cave. You don't need to accompany me anymore. Xiuqin bowed and answered, Yes. Mo Tienga then left Lord Daoist Jinghe's Immortal's cave and walked towards her former small Immortal's cave. At the same time, inside Lord Daoist Jinghe's main hall, this little girl, she's really different now. Did you say her meridians were transformed by that deification cultivator? Lord Daoist Jinghe turned towards the youth sitting in the chair. She nodded with a wooden expression. With spiritual roots of the origin and the art of the origin, this girl's innate talent can be said to not be inferior to any genius cultivator. On the contrary, I should rejoice that I accepted her as my disciple. In time, advancing to the nascent soul realm won't be a problem for her. At that time, our Clear Spring Peak will have more than 3 nascent soul cultivators. Haha. Halfway through his laughter, Lord Daoist Jinghe noticed that she didn't react at all. He raised his eyebrows and said, What? Isn't that something to be happy about? She finally moved. He stood up and said tiredly, I'll go back first. His reaction surprised Lord Daoist Jinghe. Wait, could it be that your injuries haven't healed yet? They've healed a long time ago. Then what's the meaning of your dead face? It's nothing. As if it's nothing. Lord Daoist Jinghe didn't believe him in the slightest. Brat, have your wings grown hard? You actually dared to give me, your master, an unpleasant look. Tell me, what do you want? She said helplessly. I'll go back and cultivate, all right? Cultivate again. Lord Daoist Jinghe shouted. You just came out of closed-door meditation. What's there to cultivate for? I just want to form my nascent soul as soon as possible. His words surprised Lord Daoist Jingha. Why are you in a hurry to form your nascent soul? Didn't you say that deification cultivator also gave you a lot of benefits that would make it a lot easier for you to form your nascent soul? That being the case, why are you in a hurry? At that moment, She curled up the corners of his lips and snorted softly. Benefits? You beat me half to death first, then gave me benefits. You call that a reward? You probably don't know the feeling of powerlessness in front of absolute strength, right? After he finished speaking, he turned around and left the cave, leaving Lord Daoist Jingha in a daze for a long time, muttering to himself, "This brat is serious." Chapter 136. What are you trying to do by hiding her identity? If you don't tell me, don't blame me for taking your life. She was silent for a long time before he said softly, "If I didn't hide her identity, she wouldn't have stayed at Xianqing school." Stayed at Xianqing school? Zhong Muling was a bit surprised and asked seriously, "What do you want her to do if she stays at Xianqing school?" She showed a bitter smile and answered bluntly, "What can she do if she doesn't stay at Xianqing school?" Zhong Muling was dumbfounded. He naturally understood the meaning behind Shi's words. How long could an aura-refining cultivator with a special constitution and no backing live in the cultivation world? But when he thought about it again, he realized there was another meaning to Shi's words. If Mo Good didn't stay at Xianqing school, this brat naturally couldn't do anything. He softened his tone a bit and said, "So, we're doing this out of kindness?" This time, she didn't answer his question. After a long time, he finally said, "Senior, do you know about the matter between me and her father?" Mo Tiange had told him about this matter. Zhong Muling snorted. "I heard about it." She smiled and said, "There are some things she doesn't know. Presumably, Senior also doesn't know." He paused for a moment, then said slowly, "More than 20 years ago, before her father died, he helped me escape and told me to take care of his wife and daughter, but he promised me one thing." Zhong Muling was stunned. "What thing?" She said slowly, word by word, "I'll be the one in charge of dual cultivation with this woman in the future." After he finished speaking, he didn't say anything else. Suddenly, there was a spiritual aura fluctuation. Zhong Muling silently appeared in front of him with a livid expression. "You'll be the one in charge?" He shook his sleeves and released his spiritual pressure. She fell to the ground again, suffering more injuries on top of his previous injuries. Zhong Muling's expression darkened. "You mean her father promised her to you?" She was seriously injured, but he smiled and didn't lower his head. "If Senior wants to understand it that way, it's fine. What about you? What do you think?" "Me?" She wiped the bloodstain on the corner of his mouth and sat up. "Before her second uncle passed away, I promised that if she wasn't willing, I wouldn't force her." Zhong Muling no longer said anything. His expression was gloomy and uncertain. Sometimes, a fierce expression flashed across his face, and other times, it calmed down. He stared fixedly at Shi's pale, bloodless face. She didn't look at him, but he was also fearless. His expression was calm. Ling. There was another spiritual aura fluctuation inside the hut. Yuan Bao suddenly appeared. He stared at Shi with great interest, then said to Zhong Muling, "Don't you think dual cultivation is a good idea?" Zhong Muling glowered at him with an unpleasant expression. Ingot spread his hands and said innocently, "All right, dual cultivation isn't a good idea. However, this brat has the yang spiritual bead and has 2 metal and fire spiritual roots, so his yang aura is extremely strong. He's not a bad choice to be Tiange's human furnace." Once she said that, Shi's expression changed. He raised his head and stared at the two people. Zhong Muling's expression softened. He muttered to himself for a while, then slowly nodded. "What you said does make sense." The two of them then looked down at Shi, as if they were examining whether he was qualified or not. The spiritual aura inside Shi's body surged. Anger attacked his heart, and he suddenly spat out another mouthful of blood. Yuan Bao clicked his tongue and crouched down to grab Shi's hand. His surging spiritual aura rushed into Qin Shi's body. It's not good to be a human furnace this week. Ling, let me train this brat, okay? He has the yang spiritual bead inside his body, so he's not far from having a pure yang constitution. He's actually suitable to learn from me. Zhong Muling snorted, then flicked his sleeve and disappeared from the hut. If you like him, then take him. Why are you asking me? Asterisk, 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 human furnace. Qin Shi softly muttered these two words and opened his eyes. In his entire life, he had never been humiliated like this. He knew that although those two people seriously injured him, they also gave him a lot of benefits. Even if they didn't owe him anything, it couldn't be considered a grudge. It was just that he couldn't swallow this humiliation. Human furnace. They actually wanted him to be a human furnace. Ever since he was a child, he practiced Taoist mental cultivation techniques and had never thought about using a human furnace. However, he never expected that one day someone would actually want him to be a human furnace. Closing his eyes, Qin Shi calmed himself down. Ever since he came to Mount Taikong, when he was 8 years old, he had never experienced such emotional fluctuations. He had a nascent soul grandmaster, and his cultivation was fast, so no one dared to give him a hard time. Even if he went out alone, he was resourceful enough to protect himself. In those few short days, that deification cultivator called Yuan Bao taught him a set of incantations and fed him a lot of strange things. Some of them made him feel so much pain that he wished he was dead, but some of them made his cultivation level increase rapidly, almost tormenting him to the point where he was half dead. Before he left, Yuan Bao told him with a grin that he had to form his nascent soul as soon as possible so that he could be a good human furnace. Thinking up to this point, Qin Shi once again clasped his palms and pursed his lips. Human furnace. He couldn't even say these words to his master, so he could only bury this secret in his heart. The incantations Yuan Bao gave him allowed him to get closer and closer to having a pure yang constitution. Many of the thresholds for realm breakthroughs would become easier and easier for him. This was naturally a huge benefit for him. If he didn't do anything excessive, he wouldn't return kindness with enmity. However, those words not only made him feel humiliated, but he also worried. If those two people really prepared to become his human furnace after he advanced, what should he do? He didn't hate Mo Tiange, and he didn't deny that he once had such thoughts, but that was only for a moment. He hadn't reached the great Tao yet, so his heart couldn't hold other things. Dual cultivation also wasn't within his scope of consideration. However, this kind of thing happened, making him feel extremely embarrassed when he faced her. This kind of embarrassment had nothing to do with her, but he didn't want to face her. He thought for a long time about how to solve this problem. If he practiced the incantations, his pure yang aura would become more and more abundant until it was infinitely close to a pure yang constitution. Then, he would be more suitable to become their human furnace. However, if he didn't practice, his cultivation speed wouldn't be so fast. He might even be trapped in the nascent soul realm for the rest of his life, unable to advance to the deification realm. Therefore, in the end, he decided not only to practice, but also to advance quickly. He had to advance to the nascent soul realm as soon as possible and then advance to the deification realm. Only after he advanced to the deification realm and took control of his own fate could he erase this taste of humiliation. After taking a deep breath, Qin Shi stood up and walked out of the cave. His injuries were completely healed, and his cultivation level had also made progress in the past 2 years. In a few days, he would be ready to advance to the late stage of the core formation realm. He thought he was very confident that he could advance to the peak stage of the core formation realm in another 20 to 30 years. Then he could attempt to form his nascent soul. In this way, he was 143 years old now, so it was very possible for him to form his nascent soul in 200 years. As for after that, he didn't know how many years it would take. His master advanced to the nascent soul realm when he was 400 years old, and he was now more than 800 years old. He had been stuck in the nascent soul realm for more than 400 years, but he was still in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm and still couldn't touch the threshold of the late stage. His aptitude was only slightly worse than his master's. It was only because he had the yang spiritual bead and had no distractions that he could have such a cultivation level. If he advanced to the nascent soul realm, he probably wouldn't have any advantage. He was absent-mindedly thinking along the way when he suddenly heard movement in front of him. His footsteps stopped, and he was startled. "This place is Tienga. Congratulations. Grandmaster accepted you as an official disciple so quickly. I'm really envious." "Ah, wrong. I should call you Martial Uncle." Mo Tienga talked to Luo Fengxue while tidying up the things in the cave. Hearing what she said, she couldn't help but smile. "Senior Martial Sister Luo, you calling me Martial Uncle really makes me nervous." "Why are you nervous?" Luo Fengxue said matter-of-factly. "You're Grandmaster's official disciple, so you naturally have to call me Martial Uncle. You shouldn't call me Senior Martial Sister anymore. I can't afford to call you that now, and it wouldn't be good if other people heard it." "Then all right, Fengxue." Upon hearing this form of address, Luo Fengxue smiled. "I didn't expect you to call me by my name until today. Martial Uncle Mo. In fact, you're the most vigilant person." Luo Fengxue's tone was teasing, but it made Mo Tienga blush. Luo Fengxue was right. Mo Tienga just didn't want to be too close to other people, so she was reluctant to call her by her name. However, Luo Fengxue always treated her with sincerity. In fact, Mo Tienga felt sorry for Luo Fengxue. "Fengxue, that's enough. You don't need to explain." Luo Fengxue smiled and said, "I understand. You've experienced many ups and downs in the past, so you're always wary of others. If you weren't brought back by Martial Uncle Shoujing and accepted as Grandmaster's disciple, I also wouldn't have treated you sincerely." Mo Tienga felt a bit better after hearing what Luo Fengxue said, so she smiled and said, "All right, Fengxue, I won't live here anymore. I'll leave the medicinal fields to you. In the future, if new people move in, it's up to you whether you want to move them or not. All right, you're Grandmaster's official disciple now, and the spiritual plants we bought from Danding School last time are still in my hands. I won't be polite, and will take them all. You won't object, right?" Mo Tienga couldn't help but laugh. "Of course. I'm an elder now, so I naturally can't bicker with the younger generation." "Huh. You adapted to your identity quite quickly, but now you're already putting on the airs of an elder. Oomph. In any case, I've taken advantage of you, so I won't fight with you over this title." The two of them chatted for a while before Luo Fengxue took Mo Tienga to see Master Daoist Xinin. During the great battle 2 years ago, both Luo Fengxue and Wei Jiaxi were injured. Wei Jiaxi's injuries were more serious, so she was still recuperating. Luo Fengxue, on the other hand, was already much better. She even received medicinal pills and other things as a reward from the school. As for Han Qingyu, she was injured recently and was still in closed-door meditation to recuperate. Therefore, when Mo Tienga returned, she only saw Luo Fengxue. As they approached the cave, Mo Tienga saw that the disciple guarding the entrance immediately came to greet them. "Greetings to Martial Uncle Mo, Senior Martial Sister Luo." Mo Tienga was a bit astonished. Had the matter of her being accepted as an official disciple already spread throughout Clear Spring Peak? Luo Fengxue whispered to her. As soon as Grandmaster returned, he said you dared to face a 5th-ranked demonic beast by yourself during the demonic beast battle and didn't let down Xianxing School's prestige. Therefore, he announced that he accepted you as an official disciple. So that was the case. No wonder the disciple guarding the entrance changed the way he addressed her. When Mo Tienga entered the cave's hall, Master Daoist Xinin was meditating with his eyes closed. Luo Fengxue called out, "Master!" Master Daoist Xinin opened his eyes. His gaze swept over them before it finally fell on Mo Tienga. "Tienga, are you all right?" Mo Tienga stepped forward and solemnly saluted him. "Martial Uncle Xinin, I'm fine. Thank you for worrying about me." Master Daoist Xinin stroked his long beard and said with a smile, since you've been accepted as an official disciple by Master, you don't need to call me Martial Uncle anymore. You can just call me Senior Martial Brother. Yes. Mo Tienga changed the way she addressed him. Senior Martial Brother Xianin, Tienga doesn't dare to forget the several years of teaching you. I have to leave today, so I specially came to express my gratitude. This child, Master Taoist Xianin, stared at her with a loving gaze. She disappeared for 2 years and built her foundation in 2 years. Honestly speaking, he taught her for no more than 3 years. However, although they weren't master and disciple in name, they were actually master and disciple. Tienga, since you've become master's disciple, you must cultivate diligently in the future and mustn't let down master's prestige. Do you understand? I'll sincerely follow Senior Martial Brother Xuanin's instructions. You and I will have many opportunities to meet in the future, so you don't need to feel sad. Go. Yes. Mo Tienga thanked him solemnly, then retreated with Luo Fengxue. All right, Fengxue, I'm going back to my cave. If you have nothing to do in the future, you can come to see me. Luo Fengxue smiled and stepped forward to hug her. I understand. Although she said that, she understood that they would have fewer opportunities to meet in the future. How could she go to Grandmaster Jinghe's cave often? After saying goodbye to Luo Fengxue, Mo Tienga turned around and saw someone standing not far from her with an unhappy expression on his face. It was Qin Shi. They hadn't seen each other for more than 2 years since they parted at Luoyan Cliff. When he came out of Zhong Yuling's virtual sky world, Qin Shi's expression was very unsightly. Now, the way he looked at her was also indescribably complicated. He seemed to be reminiscing about her, but his gaze was alienated. His attitude was cold, and his expression was conflicted. Mo Tienga stopped. Her feelings were also indescribably complicated. Should I go and ask him about him? She felt unwilling for a moment, but she also felt that she shouldn't care. In the end, she finally walked towards Qin Shi with a smile on her face. But the next moment, Qin Shi lowered his gaze, turned around, and walked away without hesitation. She was stunned on the spot. It wasn't that he didn't see her walk past him. He just didn't want to greet her. She felt stuffy in her heart. She couldn't tell whether it was anger or stuffiness. Mo Tienga turned around and saw Luo Fengxue looking at her in surprise. She must have seen what happened just now. Mo Tienga took a deep breath and smiled at Luo Fengxue. It's nothing. I'm going back. Okay. Luo Fengxue answered hesitantly. She hesitated for a moment, but in the end, she didn't say anything about the so-called Senior Martial Brother Qin. After all, Tienga was her martial uncle now. As an outsider, she really didn't need to meddle in this matter. After returning to her new cave, Mo Tienga sat in the small living room for a while. Every grass, every tree, every table, and every chair in this cave were left by someone else. It seemed to be full of the past that didn't belong to her. Its former owner might have been sitting here, holding a teacup, talking to someone, or just meditating just like her. He also used to meditate in the cultivation room and read those books. His handwriting could still be seen on the papers. The pill concocting room, pill concocting tools, the lounge. Everything had its traces. In the end, she smiled, stood up, took a deep breath, and put all the things in the room into an empty storage bag. Whether it was the tables, chairs, or books, none of them belonged to her, so she might as well replace them all. Martial Uncle Mo. A cry of surprise came into her ears. Mo Tienga glanced around and saw 2 female cultivators standing at the door, looking at her with great astonishment. What's wrong? Do you need something? She asked expressionlessly. What are you doing? Tidying up my cave. Huh? Mo Tienga glanced at them coldly. What's wrong? Didn't you say everything in this cave belongs to me? Can't I use it even if I want to? This. The 2 female cultivators stared at her helplessly. That being said, they never expected this Martial Uncle Mo would throw away all of Martial Uncle Shoujing's things. Chapter 137. Lord Taoist Jinghe's Immortal's Cave was called Shanqing Palace. When Mo Tienga saw it, she was surprised. She thought it would be called Myriad Flowers Palace or 100 Fragrances Palace or something like that. She didn't expect it to be called such a normal name. In this palace, aside from Lord Taoist Jinghe, there were only her and 16 maids. These maids were all foundation-building female cultivators in the school. Their spiritual roots were ordinary, so they weren't qualified to be accepted by core formation cultivators. Therefore, they volunteered to be the maids of a nascent soul grandmaster, hoping to get some pointers. Lord Taoist Jinghe wasn't a stingy person. As his maids, they could indeed often get pointers and rewards from him. In the beginning, these maids might really have come for the advancement of their cultivation levels. However, they had been serving a man for a long time. This man had a high cultivation level, a good appearance, and a good demeanor, so they unwittingly became delusional and jealous. During her days in Wenyang Pond, Imo Tiange was used to seeing Mei, Lan, Zhu, and Chrysanthemum bickering, so she didn't think much of it. Now that she was in Enchanting Palace, she realized that bickering among them was really nothing. These 16 maids were named Mei, Lan, Zhu Zhu, Qin, Shi, Hua, Hua, Chun, Xia, Qiu Dong, Yushui, Feng Shuang. The names were all given by Lord Taoist Jinghe, so they were extremely cliché. According to the standard of these names, this immortal's cave was actually called Enchanting Palace, which really surprised Imo Tiange. Her Mingxin residence was relatively close to the residences of Qin, Qi, Hua, and Xiuqin. These four maids were called Xiuqin, Qingqi, Xianshu, and Daiwa. These names were a bit more elegant than Mei, Lan, Zhu, and Zhu, but the way they interacted with each other was even worse than Mei, Lan, Zhu, and Zhu. Moreover, because her cultivation level was almost the same as theirs, these maids didn't serve her sincerely. Although they called her martial uncle and never disobeyed her, their speech and behavior gradually lost respect. So far, Imo Tiange laid a 5-spirit formation around her small cave and only told them to send summoning talismans outside the cave to minimize the chance of contact. Since she blocked these maids outside the cave and Lord Taoist Jinghe left her to fend for herself, Imo Tiange was finally able to enter the virtual sky world and continue her cultivation. With the Sunu art of the origin, her cultivation progress was extremely fast. She only needed to cultivate for 6 hours a day, and she would be able to achieve the same results as before. Nevertheless, Imo Tiange wasn't in a hurry to cultivate. Every day, she would cultivate for 6 hours. Once she achieved the same results as before, she would stop. That was because she knew her cultivation level was forcibly raised to the middle stage of the foundation building realm, so her temperament and realm weren't stable yet. If she impatiently sought quick results, her temperament wouldn't be enough when the time came, and she would most likely fail to form her gold core. She would have to turn back and continue on this path, so it was better to walk slowly now and firmly lay a solid foundation. Because she had forcibly suppressed her cultivation speed, she had also slowed down the pace of her soul-refining art. Any art used in fights of magical power had to be based on mental cultivation techniques, and the soul-refining art was the same. She was only in the middle stage of the foundation-building realm now. Although her primordial spirit and meridians were different from those of ordinary foundation-building cultivators, she couldn't ignore her cultivation level. If her cultivation level wasn't high enough, the soul-refining art would eventually backfire on her. Therefore, Imo Tiange devoted the remaining 12 to 12 hours to other skills. Array formations, alchemy, weapon forging, talisman crafting, medicine, and mechanisms. The so-called mechanism technique was one of the more unique techniques. According to legend, in the distant ancient times, the school of Imo once appeared in the human world. Their grandmaster, Imo Z, was skilled in craftsmanship and could use wood, fine iron, and other materials to create extremely powerful mechanisms. One of them could fight against 100 enemies, and they could even attack cities and plunder lands. In the immortal cultivation world, this was naturally a small skill that was not worth mentioning. However, the immortal cultivation world also had its own mechanism technique. Puppets made from various spiritual objects and crystals could also obtain the same power as human cultivators. Unfortunately, after Mo Tinga flipped through the books on mechanism technique, she found these puppets needed something called crystals to be activated. Now that crystals couldn't be found, it was no wonder the mechanism technique was also lost. Cultivating, farming, and practicing skills, the days passed by just like that. Mo Tinga holed up in this small immortal's cave, but the more she learned, the more fascinated she became. She didn't even see other people. She didn't know how much time had passed in this kind of lonely, but not lonely life. But her nominal master finally remembered her. Mo Tinga sat on the chair, still looking down and letting Lord Taoist Jinghe examine her without raising her eyes. Lord Taoist Jinghe stared at her for a while and finally said, "Girl, you're quite smart. You actually didn't cultivate desperately and slowed down your cultivation pace. You're much smarter than that stinky brat." Stinky brat? Mo Tinga's mind raced. Who's he talking about? After saying that, Lord Taoist Jinghe lay down again. You deliberately suppress your cultivation speed every day. Are you very idle? She wasn't idle at all, but Mo Tinga didn't dare to say this directly, so she just nodded and looked at her nominal master very carefully. Lord Taoist Jinghe didn't care. He didn't even look at her and continued to peel grapes with his spiritual power. How about Master give you something to do? This is considered an errand? Mo Tinga looked at him even more carefully. Lord Taoist Jinghe glanced at her, chuckled, and said cordially, "Disciple, Master is thinking about you. Look at you. You still have more than 9 years to live. Locking yourself up like this doesn't seem good, does it?" "Master," Mo Tinga said thoughtfully, "Disciple thinks it's very good. I like this kind of life very much." Lord Taoist Jinghe raised his eyebrows. "How is it very good? You don't need to be embarrassed. Master has already thought about it for you. I'm guessing you don't cultivate more than 10 hours every day, right? There are 24 hours in a day, and there's still half of it left. You don't need to sleep, so why are you idle? Therefore, Master thought of a way for you. I'll give you something to do." Seeing that Mo Tinga didn't object, Lord Taoist Jinghe immediately smiled. You're so obedient. Do you think Master will harm you? I'm telling you, aside from cultivation, there are some things that are also very important. Master won't harm you." Mo Tinga sighed. "Master, if you have something to say, please say it directly." Lord Taoist Jinghe immediately took out a jade slip. "You just need to follow what's written on this and finish your tasks at a fixed time every day." Mo Tinga doubtfully sank her divine sense into the jade slip. She suddenly wanted to vomit blood. Collect dew at the yin hour. Take care of spiritual plants at the Mao hour. Take care of spiritual beasts at the Chen hour. Go out to preach Tao at the Si hour and return at noon. Out of the remaining 14 hours, 10 hours were arranged, and most of them were done by his maids. What does this master want to do? Does he want me to run around in circles every day? Master, Mo Tinga's expression was a bit dark. Aren't these tasks a bit too much? Too much, Lord Taoist Jinghe said. Back then, when Xianin, Qingyin, and those brats just entered the sect, they did a lot of things, but you didn't do much. Fine, disciples have the duty to serve their masters. But the problem was that masters also have the duty to teach disciples. This master never taught her, so why should she fulfill her duty as a disciple? Seeing that she didn't speak, Lord Taoist Jinghe blew his beard and glared at her. Is there a disciple like you? I ask you to do something, yet you're so reluctant. Back then, Xianin and the others. All right. Tinga said helplessly, I'll do whatever master says. Disciple will just do as you say. That's more like it. She braced herself and agreed to Lord Taoist Jinghe's orders. In fact, she had no choice but to agree. Did she dare to disobey a nascent soul cultivator? But what made her even more depressed was that even though she was already in a bad mood, the maids she took over were still giving her bad looks. Here, the maid who previously did the dew collecting task threw her the jade bottle containing the dew and the jade stick containing the dew. Her expression was cold and full of disdain. Grandmaster likes the dew before 2:45 in the morning. If it's a little later, he won't want it. In addition, they must have fragrant and clean spiritual plants. If there's a strange smell, Grandmaster will definitely fly into a rage. You do as you see fit. Mo Tienga took them, but she didn't feel like thanking her. She just turned around and left. However, she heard the two maids behind her talking loudly. Mingxia, your task has been taken over by others. What are you doing? The maid who dealt with Mo Tienga a moment ago said in a mocking tone. Grandmaster has already spoken. What can I do? If there's nothing to do, then there's nothing to do. I can even have more time to cultivate. She's a disciple, and we're maids. Why did she come to steal our task? Why don't you think about what kind of person our Grandmaster is? In any case, he's a middle-stage nascent soul cultivator. Even if a core formation cultivator kneels and begs him, he'll definitely accept her as his disciple, let alone a small foundation-building cultivator. So what if she has the title of disciple? She's still the same as us. You're right. I heard Grandmaster accepted her as his disciple because he had a conflict with another cultivation group. It was just an expedient measure. Some people don't really think they've reached the sky in a single bound. Hey, don't say it like that. A disciple is a disciple, but we're maids. If we offend her, maybe Grandmaster won't want to give us guidance anymore. By the way, Grandmaster said he's going to preach Tao to us today, right? Yes, let's not be late. Mo Tienga clenched her teeth, pretending not to see or hear. What's the point of gossip? It's not like I'll lose a piece of flesh. He actually preached Tao to maids, but he didn't give her any guidance, let alone give her a master-disciple gift. After picking the dew at 2:45 in the morning, Mo Tienga rushed back to Shanqing Palace and took over the job of taking care of the spiritual plants. This time, the ones who handed over the task were Wei Yu and Qingxue of the Rain, Snow, Wind, and Frost sect. The two of them were rather straightforward. They just threw her a jade slip that classified spiritual plants, then turned around and ignored her. It took Mo Tienga almost an hour to clearly understand how to handle the various spiritual plants, but the two maids were still mocking and ridiculing her on the side. Qingxue, this hairpin of yours is pretty good. Is it a magic tool? This was bestowed to me by Grandmaster a few days ago. Master said my skin is fair, so I look the most beautiful with this fragrant green snow hairpin. If I encounter a fight of magical power, I can use it to protect myself. I also received a reward. Look at this ribbon. Grandmaster said girls should be beautiful to be pleasing to the eye. Wearing a gray sect uniform without even a hairpin on her head is too uncouth. Isn't that right? Last time, when we went to Mount Tianhua, Grandmaster saw Senior Marshal Sister Jean from Soul's Retreat Peak and bestowed her clothes. As maids, we have to serve Grandmaster every day, so we have to dress even more beautifully. But it's really strange. It's not like Grandmaster hasn't accepted any female disciples. Marshal Uncle Sushin is also extraordinarily beautiful. So why did he accept a completely unremarkable one now? That depends on whether she can dress herself up or not. Say, she looks like that. What else can Grandmaster do? You're right. The two maids covered their mouths and giggled. Mo Tienga numbly finished pruning the branches, catching the insects, watering the plants, closing the restrictions on the medicinal garden, and leaving. When it was 7 in the morning and the sky was bright, she went to the back of the mountain behind the cave, wearing a dusty sect uniform, not even a hairpin on her head. Just like that, Mo Tienga let out a snort. The sect uniform of Foundation Building Cultivators was blue with white sleeves. How is it gray? Elite disciples like Han Qingyu, Luo Fengxue, and Yi Jingwen all dress like that. Even Senior Marshal Brother Xianin and the others also dressed like that. Hairpin? She was combed into a Taoist bun right now, so why would she need a hairpin? Senior Marshal Sister Sushin was also plain and clean. She even said she looked like that. Even if she didn't say she was as beautiful as a fairy, at least she was much better than them. Mo Tienga angrily walked to the spiritual beast courtyard at the back of the mountain. This time, Qin, Qi, Shu, and Hua were waiting for her. As a nascent soul cultivator, Lord Taoist Jinghe had many spiritual beasts. This courtyard was full of spiritual beasts, ranging from the 2nd rank to the 6th rank. Reportedly, he took care of the spiritual beasts with higher ranks. But the spiritual beasts above the 5th rank were equivalent to the core formation realm. They were only in the foundation building realm, so the 4 of them took care of them together to avoid any accidents. Martial Uncle Mo, Grandmaster must have given you the Spiritual Beast Institute's restriction tablets a long time ago. We only have some specific methods to use them, so we'll give them to you for reference. As Xiaoqin spoke, she passed a jade slip to Mo Tiange. Mo Tiange calmed down a little. Finally, this group of people didn't anger her. She didn't notice that Xianshu's eyes shifted and she glanced at Daiwa. The 4 maids understood tacitly, but they just stared at Mo Tiange without saying anything. Mo Tiange took the jade slip and quickly finished reading it. After all, spiritual beasts weren't spiritual plants that could be planted casually. There were only a dozen kinds of spiritual beasts in the entire spiritual beast courtyard. After she finished reading the jade slip, she went to prepare all kinds of fodder. Soon after, she used the identity tablet Lord Taoist Jinghe gave her to open the restriction at the entrance of the spiritual beast courtyard. 3 2nd-rank spiritual beasts, 3 3rd-rank spiritual beasts, 1 4th-rank spiritual beast, 2 5th-rank spiritual beasts, and 1 6th-rank spiritual beast. She put the fodder in order until she reached the 5th-rank spiritual beast. This was a 5th-rank sky-treading bull. It had huge horns and was said to have the power to step on the sky and split the earth. Mo Tiange followed the instructions on the jade slip, opened the outermost restriction, and put the fodder down. Just as she was about to turn around and leave, the restriction on the inner layer suddenly flashed. In an instant, the sky-treading bull moved towards the sky. Its hind hooves rubbed against the ground and bumped into the restriction. With a flash, the restriction disappeared. When Mo Tiange heard this sound, she turned around halfway and suddenly saw the bull's horn rushing toward her. She immediately summoned the white silk handkerchief and a brick wall fell down, firmly blocking the force of the bull's horn. Soon after, she reached out to grab the white silk handkerchief that had returned to its original state. She then carried herself and ran outside. On the way, she glared fiercely at Qin, Qi, Shu, Hua, who were standing at the edge of the courtyard. These 4 people didn't ridicule her, because they already planned to teach her a lesson like this. But she didn't have much time to think about it now. The sky-treading bull was chasing after her, dashing left and right, but its horn was always aimed at her. Mo Tiange had already used the white silk handkerchief to avoid the 5th-rank demonic beast's attack a long time ago. Now that she could control it more easily, she wasn't in a hurry. The sky-treading bull's power lay in its strength, but its speed wasn't very good. She used the white silk handkerchief with all her strength, so it wasn't easy to hide. However, it was also difficult to catch it. Of course, she could also run ahead with the bull and ask Lord Taoist Jinghe for help. But wouldn't that make her look very incompetent? Mo Tiange hastily retreated, and a lamp appeared in her hand. The lamp flew high and shone brightly. Mo Tiange pointed with her spiritual aura, and the light shone on the sky-treading bull's body. The sky-treading bull slowed down a bit. At that moment, Mo Tiange threw out several formation discs and spirit stones. Disorienting formation. The enchanting lantern, which she had never used before, was paired with the disorienting formation. In an instant, the sky-treading bull was at a loss. Its spiritual aura was indeed powerful, so the enchanting lantern and disorienting formation could only block it for a while. However, this short moment was already enough for Mo Tiange. Spiritual beasts also had divine senses. In the disorienting formation, spiritual beasts would instinctively use their divine senses to sense their surroundings, giving Mo Tiange a chance to take advantage of. Using the soul-refining art, she controlled her divine sense and ruthlessly lashed it. The sky-treading bull moved and violently jumped up. The white silk handkerchief attacked again, but this time, it wasn't for protection. Instead, It ruthlessly smashed the sky-treading bull with a brick wall. Upon seeing the sky-treading bull falling to the ground, Tinga heaved a sigh of relief. She didn't have a powerful enough offensive magic tool. Only the white silk handkerchief, a magic weapon, could possibly injure the sky-treading bull. Coupled with the soul-refining art's unexpected attack, she was able to temporarily immobilize the sky-treading bull. Tinga locked the sky-treading bull back into the spiritual beast compound, opened all the restrictions, then walked out of the compound. She coldly stared at Qin, Qi, Shu, Hua, who had been standing on the side from the beginning. She clearly saw that when the sky-treading bull rushed out, smiles appeared on these four people's faces. They were obviously ready to scheme against her. If she didn't have the soul-refining art and several treasures on her, as well as the several restrictions here that limited the sky-treading bull's power, she would have most likely lost half her life just now. Right now, when these four people looked at her, the mocking expressions on their faces were no longer there. Instead, they were replaced with terror. From a moment the sky-treading bull broke through the restrictions to when Tinga knocked it out, only a few breaths had passed. A middle-stage foundation building cultivator was actually able to subdue a 5th-rank spiritual beast. Although it was also because the restrictions in this place limited the sky-treading bull's power, it was still enough to shock them. They were just unconvinced, so they wanted to borrow the power of the 5th-rank spiritual beast to teach this martial uncle, who was also a foundation-building cultivator but was looked upon favorably by Grandmaster, a lesson. There were restrictions here, and the four of them were ready to attack at any time, so presumably they wouldn't take her life. However, it was very possible that she would lose half her life. They weren't afraid of Grandmaster's anger, because Grandmaster didn't like people who didn't have abilities. As long as they kept her alive, Grandmaster wouldn't blame them. But they never expected that a 5th-rank spiritual beast would actually be subdued in just a few breaths' time. Tinga sneered. She held the white silk handkerchief in one hand and the shuttle of flying Apsara in the other. It seems you're very unconvinced. In that case, let's fight. All of you come at me together. I'll let you know why I'm a disciple and you're my maids. Qin, Qi, Shu, and Hua originally had frightened expressions on their faces, but when they heard what she said, they looked at each other with anger in their eyes. That's right. They were unconvinced. Their aptitudes were a bit inferior, but their cultivation levels weren't weak. There were also middle-stage foundation-building cultivators among them. So why did they have to call a cultivator in the same realm as the martial uncle? Why did Grandmaster value her so much and make her familiar with everything in Enchanting Palace? Junior martial sisters, since martial uncle said so, let's play with her. Chapter 138. Except for Xiuqin, who was in the middle stage of the foundation-building realm, the other maids were all in the early stage. Their aptitudes were average, and they didn't have a strong backer, so they were already very lucky to be able to advance to the foundation-building realm. Even with the guidance of a nascent soul cultivator, only a few of them could advance to the middle stage. But in any case, they'd been serving nascent soul grandmasters for a long time, so they'd seen a lot of big scenes. Tinga's disregard for them immediately aroused their anger. Once Xiuqin finished speaking, Qingxi took out her magic tool, while Xianshu and Daiwa took out their flying magic tools and chose their positions. Tinga raised her eyebrows. Based on their positions, they had some knowledge of fights of magical powers and weren't idiots. But so what if they weren't idiots? 4 foundation-building cultivators and female cultivators with no experience in fights of magical powers. They weren't worthy of her attention. The 4 of them stood in their positions, but didn't attack immediately. They seemed to be waiting for her. Tinga smiled and raised her left hand. The shuttle of flying Apsara rushed towards Xiuqin while she stepped on the white silk handkerchief and instantly flew away from her original position. Seeing her attack, Qin, Qi, Shu, and Hua each took out their magic tools. Some were flower baskets, some were ribbons. In short, they were all beautiful things that women liked. Although Tinga didn't take them seriously, she had a good habit. No matter who her opponent was, once they started fighting, she would treat them with caution. The shuttle of flying Apsara turned into a golden light and enveloped Xiuqin. Xiuqin raised a Rui jade, which emitted light and blocked the attack. At the same time, the other three people used their own methods to attack. Mo Tiange didn't even look at them. She waved her hand and retrieved the shuttle of flying Apsara, instantly changing her position. With this move, Mo Tiange had a rough idea of the situation. The four people's magic tools were good, but they didn't have much experience in fighting. Presumably, they didn't need to fight when they followed Lord Taoist Jinghe. Moreover, female cultivators didn't like fighting, so their knowledge of fights of magical powers probably came from Lord Taoist Jinghe's explanations. This made things a lot easier. Ever since Mo Tiange entered Kunwu, she'd experienced countless life-and-death battles. At first, she followed Second Uncle, but later, she fought on her own. The dangers she went through were beyond these four people's imagination. Battles of magical powers did not only rely on cultivation and magic tools. Sometimes in the face of life and death, one could even rely on a flash of intuition. This was the accumulation of countless experiences. Opponents without experience were the easiest to deal with, because even if they knew what they should do at this time, they often couldn't do it. After a series of probing attacks, Mo Tiange released the enchanting lantern. If an experienced cultivator saw the sky-treading bull's reaction after she took out this lamp, they would know it was a hallucination-type magic weapon, and they would just retreat a certain distance away from it. Therefore, this kind of magic weapon had very little use against cultivators who were good at fights of magical powers. However, these four people didn't notice it at all. They were still focused on their own magic weapons. The enchanting lantern flew up and shone brightly. Mo Tiange condensed her aura on her fingers and guided the light to shine down slowly. Qin, Qi, Shu, Hua, and Hua immediately felt their vision darken and the surrounding scenery disappeared. They were at a loss of what to do. Suddenly, a golden light appeared above Xinshu's head, instantly covering her. Ah! Hearing their companion scream, the other three were shocked. Xiuqin was even more flustered. She shouted, "You dare to kill them!" What answered her was Qingqi's scream. Qingqi was fighting with a flying sword. Her flower basket had the upper hand, so she was feeling proud of herself when several flying needles silently appeared beside her and shot into her body. Next was Daiwa. It was still the shuttle of flying Apsara that dealt with Daiwa, but this time it formed a square formation and trapped Daiwa inside. Martial Uncle Mo. Hearing her junior martial sister screams one after another, Xiuqin couldn't help but shout, "Even if you're Grandmaster's disciple, killing people is too much." Right after she said that, her eyes suddenly lit up. Mo Tiange, who was flying in the air, smiled coldly. "Too much? You also know I'm Master's disciple, so why do you want to take my life?" Seeing her smile, Xiuqin felt cold, but she still answered, "We sisters don't want to take Martial Uncle's life. We just want to teach me a lesson, right?" Mo Tiange flung her sleeves. A seemingly substantial spiritual aura flew out and hit Qingqi, Xinshu, and Daiwa, who were lying on the ground. The three of them let out muffled screams, but they didn't die. Xiuqin shouted, "Martial Uncle!" Her voice was filled with fear and anger. She was scared because if something happened to the three of them, she, as the leader of the four, would definitely have to take responsibility. She was angry because Mo Tiange didn't even care that they were Grandmaster's maids. Mo Tiange was unmoved. She just glanced at her contemptuously, then turned around and entered the Spiritual Beasts Institute. "I can't act spoiled, but you can't fight. That's all you've got? Don't be an eyesore in front of me in the future." Mo Tiange's words were very rude, but Xiuqin didn't dare to say a word. Ever since she became Grandmaster's maid, no one had ever dared to treat her so rudely. Even those core formation martial uncles were polite to her out of respect for Grandmaster. It was precisely this politeness that made her think she had some status. Now that this martial uncle Mo taught them a lesson without the slightest politeness, she finally realized that a maid would always be a maid. She carefully checked every restriction, put food and water in place, cleaned every spiritual beast room, and finally left the Spiritual Beasts Institute. Qin, Qi, Shu, Hua, and Qin were no longer here, so they must have learned their lesson. The corners of Imo Tienga's lips curled up, thinking mockingly. Sure enough, this world couldn't tolerate people always being humble and small. If you endured, you'd be bullied instead. Only by being strong and suppressing others could you gain some respect. In Yunwu's sect, she had no background, no backer, and no cultivation level, so she had to restrain herself. Now that she was at Xianxing school, she was a nascent Soul Grandmaster's advanced inner disciple and had a certain level of strength, so why should she be excessively patient? After teaching them a lesson today, those 4 women should know their place. If the others also provoked her, she'd give them a good beating. It was time to go out and give a sermon. Imo Tienga was a bit worried when she saw what she had to do next. According to reason, as a middle-stage foundation-building cultivator, she could indeed give sermons to aura-refining disciples. However, she cultivated the path of the origin, which was completely different from the Tao of today. How could she give her sermons to Xianxing School's disciples? Even if she did, wouldn't it be useless to those disciples? With this question in mind, she ran to the main hall of Shanqing Palace. As soon as she stepped into the main hall, she saw Qin, Qi, Hua, and Qin kneeling in front of Lord Taoist Jinghe with an excited expression. What's going on? Imo Tienga was completely puzzled. She walked forward and saluted. Master, little disciple, come here quickly. Imo Tienga silently ignored Lord Taoist Jinghe's overly excited smile and walked towards him. Lord Taoist Jinghe called her over, but he ignored her again and turned to Qin, Qi, Hua. How badly did she beat you? Upon hearing this, Imo Tienga finally understood. As it turned out, those 4 women came to complain. However, judging from Lord Taoist Jinghe's expression, their complaint wasn't very successful. The one who spoke was Xianshu. She cautiously looked at Imo Tienga and answered, except for senior martial sister Xiuqin, martial uncle Imo knocked all of us unconscious. Her words weren't exaggerated, but her expression was delicate and pitiful. After she finished speaking, she glared at Imo Tienga with resentment before lowering her head. Imo Tienga was speechless. She wasn't a man, so what was the use of acting in front of her? Little did they know that Xianshu did this out of habit, probably because Lord Taoist Jinghe liked the coquettish side of women. Maids like them would act like little women from time to time in order to please their grandmaster to win his favor. But this time, not only did Imo Tienga ignore them, but Lord Taoist Jinghe also didn't look at her. He laughed and patted Imo Tienga's shoulder. Not bad. This is my Qin Jinghe's disciple. If you dare to be disobedient, won't you be obedient after a beating? Dilly-dallying and chattering. Aren't you annoying? Imo Tienga listened to Lord Taoist Jinghe's praise, but her eyebrows didn't even twitch. She dared to make a move because she was sure this nominal master of hers wouldn't make things difficult for her for the sake of maids. Besides, maids are maids in the end, and she was his disciple. She didn't need to act like little girls to please him. As long as her behavior was pleasing to his eyes and her cultivation level advanced quickly, he'd naturally protect her. With this master's flamboyant and murderous nature, how could she, his disciple, be weak? However, these maids all looked very smart, so why did they also come to complain about something so boring? This was because she thought too highly of these maids. Because Imo Tienga deliberately held back, Xiuqin naturally didn't dare to say anything after witnessing Imo Tienga's methods. The other 3, on the other hand, had developed an arrogant temperament under Lord Taoist Jinghe's wing. So how could they swallow this insult? However, reality made them very depressed. Judging from Grandmaster's reaction, not only did he not blame this martial Uncle Imo, but he even seemed to admire her very much. Lord Taoist Jinghe ignored the maid's embarrassed looks and raised his chin at Imo Tienga in a very good mood. Girl, you're not bad. This lord is in a good mood today, so I'll reward you with something. Just treat it as a gift from the other day when I took you as my disciple. Take out all your magic tools and whatnot. Let me see what you lack. Tinga's heart was filled with joy when she heard what he said. Medicinal pills and cultivation techniques were fine since she didn't lack them at all. As for magic tools and whatnot, she also felt she had too few means of attack. She promptly took out all the magic tools and magic weapons she used in fights of magical powers. The white silk handkerchief, the enchanting lantern, the shuttle of flying Apsara, the land-fleeing ruler, the flying needle, and the flying sword senior martial brother Xianin gave her when she built her foundation that day. Tinga thought for a while, then said, "Master, I still have the heaven and earth cloud silk armor and the spirit concealing pendant. I don't need these, do I?" Lord Taoist Jinghe didn't answer and just stared at the things on the table. He first picked up the flying sword and looked at it. It was a very common weapon for foundation-building disciples. The flying needle was a good thing, a good weapon for sneak attacks. Soon after, he saw the land-fleeing ruler and the shuttle of flying Apsara, and his brows furrowed. That stinky brat. Although the land-fleeing ruler wasn't refined by him, there were still traces of him refining it. Also, this shuttle of flying Apsara was clearly something he bestowed upon him after he built his foundation. It turned out he'd long since given it to this girl. Finally, when he saw the enchanting lantern and the white silk handkerchief, Lord Taoist Jinghe's brows became tighter and tighter until they were almost vertical. This lantern was fine, since it wasn't very useful, but this handkerchief, he didn't know what material it was made of, but he actually couldn't tell. Putting the things back, Lord Taoist Jinghe shouted, "From magic tools to magic weapons, and the armor you mentioned just now, you still think it's not enough? Don't you know most foundation-building cultivators only have 1 or 2 magic tools? You have magic weapons, but you're still not satisfied. Take them all back. I won't give them to you." A man who is never content is like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. As he spoke, he even turned around and flung his sleeves. Tinga was dumbfounded. She already knew this master of hers wasn't like other nascent soul cultivators who pretended to be mysterious and had a temperamental temperament. But wasn't this too exaggerated? He was obviously the one who wanted to reward her. So how did it become her being insatiable in the end? It wasn't her who asked for it. Lord Taoist Jinghe gave her a sidelong glance. "Why are you still standing there like a fool? Quickly go and do your thing." Tinga clenched her teeth and swallowed her anger. She put away the things, then turned around and walked away. Halfway there, she suddenly stopped, turned around, and asked, "Master," disciple wanted to ask, "Disciple isn't qualified to preach Tao, right?" Lord Taoist Jinghe shouted again. "You're not qualified? You're my disciple, but you actually said you're not qualified to preach Tao to aura refining cultivators? You must be joking." But disciple now practices the art of the origin, which is different from their Tao. What does it have to do with being different? They won't divide it among themselves. If they tell you go, just go. Yes, disciple will take her leave. Tinga rubbed her head, walked out of Shangqing Palace, and silently asked the heavens, "What kind of sin did I commit to have such a master? He doesn't give me pointers, doesn't reward me, and is temperamental and emotional. Having him is equivalent to not having him. Preach Tao, preach Tao." While muttering these words, Tinga went to the steward's hall. Marshal, Uncle the one who received her was Luo Fengxue, who was still a bit unaccustomed to calling her that. Tinga saw her expression and understood tacitly. She then followed her into the hall. Since there was no one else there, Luo Fengxue changed the way she addressed her. "Tinga, what brings you here?" Tinga smiled bitterly. "Master arranged for me to preach Tao." "Oh," Luo Fengxue suddenly understood. "You're in the foundation-building realm now, so it's not strange for him to arrange for you to preach Tao. That being said, I've never preached Tao, that doesn't matter." Luo Fengxue said, "Since you've built your foundation, you naturally have more experience than aura-refining disciples, so you can preach anything you want. What did Grandmaster say?" Master told me to preach Tao every day for 4 hours." "Huh, Upon hearing this arrangement, Luo Fengxue was puzzled. What's Grandmaster thinking? Our Xianqing school already gives Tao preaching to disciples frequently, once every 3 days. Even if you preach Tao every day, you won't have a place to do it. This was also the reason why Mo Tinga felt Lord Taoist Jinghe was deliberately tormenting her. For hours every day, could it be that he would take all the Tao preaching at Xianqing school on his own? But Luo Fengshue's tone changed. If you think it's too troublesome, I can arrange for you to teach new disciples. That way, it'll be easy and you can report to the higher-ups. Mo Tinga thought about it and felt this seemed right, so she smiled and said, Then I'll have to trouble you. I can't refuse Master's arrangement. Right now, I'm having a headache about how to report to the higher-ups. Luo Fengxue smiled and walked to the table. She took out a blank jade slip, wrote something on it, and gave it to Mo Tinga. If you want to preach Tao to all aura-refining disciples and have to go to the main peak, you can't teach new disciples. Just take this to Mengxue Hall on the mountainside. Someone will receive you there. Finally, Luo Fengxue satisfied her for once. Mo Tinga heaved a sigh of relief. She took the jade slip and went to the mountainside according to Luo Fengshue's instructions. Xianqing School had 3 ways of accepting disciples. One of them was the same as other big cultivation groups. Every 10 years, the school would open its gates and select individual cultivators from various clans with excellent spiritual roots or strong abilities. The other way was like Mo Tinga, which was recommended by cultivators in the foundation building realm and above. However, she was actually brought into the school by a core formation cultivator, so she didn't have to pass the test. The last way was to find mortals with outstanding spiritual roots from the secular world and bring them into the school. The last type of disciples usually had outstanding spiritual roots and were accepted by core formation cultivators as soon as they entered the school. Luo Fengxue was one of them. In the past, her elder brother also worshipped Master Taoist Xianin as his master. After he failed in his realm breakthrough and died, Master Taoist Xianin took care of his disciples' funeral affairs and went to the secular world. He happened to find that Luo Fengxue also had spiritual roots, so he brought her back to the school and accepted her as his disciple. Apart from the third type of disciples who were directly accepted by high-level cultivators, the other 2 types of disciples had to start at Mengxue Hall if they were in the 5th layer of the aura-refining realm or below. Therefore, Mengxue Hall was divided into 2 types of disciples. The first type was children with 3 spiritual roots or above. They were accepted because their aptitudes were high enough, so there were no requirement for their cultivation levels. The second type was disciples with poor aptitudes but still had potential. These disciples were usually the descendants of cultivators in the school, so the requirements were relaxed. When Mo Tinga arrived at Mengxue Hall, the cultivator in charge was very respectful when he saw her. Grandmaster Mo, I didn't expect you to grace us with your presence. Please forgive my rudeness. Grandmaster, Mo Tinga trembled when she heard this title. The person in charge of Mengxue Hall was naturally a foundation-building cultivator, but the people who usually did things were all aura-refining disciples. She was now the advanced inner disciple of a nascent soul grandmaster, so her seniority was equivalent to a core formation grandmaster, so there was no problem with this title. However, it hadn't been long since she advanced to the foundation-building realm. Originally, she was just an insignificant aura-refining cultivator like these people, but all of a sudden, she became a grandmaster. The contrast was too big. Moreover, the one who addressed her like this was a white-haired old man, so it was even more difficult for her to adapt. No need to be so polite. The reason I came here is clearly written in this jade slip. If there's anything you need me to do, just tell me. Yes. This aura-refining cultivator who was nearing the end of his lifespan and had no hope of advancing to the next realm didn't dare to be rude to her in the slightest. He still bowed and said, Martial Uncle Luo explained in the jade slip that Grandmaster came here to teach the new disciples of Mengxue Hall. However, Martial Uncle Luo probably doesn't know that all the new disciples of Mengxue Hall have teachers who are directly responsible for teaching them. I'm afraid. Is that so? Mo Tienga was stunned. Then just find me something to do. This Mo Tienga was a bit annoyed that the old man was still hesitating when she said anything. Are you saying that I can't do anything here? The old man repeatedly shook his head. I don't dare, I don't dare. Grandmaster, I'll tell you the truth. The highest cultivation level among us is only in the 9th layer of the aura refining realm. You can teach us directly, so why do you need to give sermons to the new disciples? Does this mean my cultivation level is too high and I'm being disliked? Mo Tienga resisted the urge to roll her eyes. She just wanted to muddle through this period of time. Why didn't this old man understand? I said anything. Do you understand? If there's nothing else, just let me sweep the floor, okay? I don't dare to trouble Grandmaster. Mo Tienga felt helpless. Then I won't do anything. I'll just sit here for 4 hours, okay? Chapter 139. The cultivators of Mengxue Hall naturally wouldn't let her sit there for 4 hours. After the cultivator who received Mo Tienga reported to the manager of Mengxue Hall, an early-stage foundation-building cultivator, learned that it was Patriarch Jinga's idea, so he came to pay a visit and gave Mo Tienga all the tasks she needed to do at Mengxue Hall. After reading the contents of the jade slip, Mo Tienga realized the cultivator who received her was right. These new disciples all had special teachers to teach them, so they didn't need to do anything. Besides, it wasn't convenient for her to do other chores. After a while, Mo Tienga looked up at the manager of Mengxue Hall and said, that being the case, how about I help teach them their homework? New disciples had to start teaching Taoist scriptures, and teaching Taoist scriptures had to start from learning how to read. Since the distant past era, many characters have been left behind. Cultivation techniques and treasures from different eras might use different characters. Disciples who had just come into contact with cultivation had to spend a lot of time learning how to read every day. The manager naturally didn't have any objections. After repeatedly agreeing, he informed the supervising disciple that Mo Tienga only needed to follow the supervising disciple to teach her homework. Mo Tienga sighed inwardly when she saw the various teaching methods of Mengxue Hall. When she embarked on the path of cultivation, all she knew was a cultivation technique. When she was in Mo family's village, even the old master didn't know that knowledge, so she could only explore it bit by bit. Later, she found second uncle and was taught by him personally. But how could uncle and niece take care of everything when they were wandering? Second uncle wasn't a teacher. Most of what she knew and learned were things she encountered on her own, and second uncle only remembered to teach her. In Xianxing school, each subject was clearly separated and taught by different cultivators. If she could do this back then, she wouldn't have had such a hard time. Nevertheless, she was just sighing. She was already very lucky to be able to reach this point. With second uncle's guidance, she was much better than individual cultivators who struggled to survive. After being led into the hall by the supervising cultivator, Mo Tienga saw that the prayer mats in the room were full of children between 6 and 17 years old. Their cultivation levels were between the 1st and 3rd layer of the aura refining realm. When they saw her walking in, their gazes all fell on her. She didn't conceal her aura. In front of these early-stage aura refining disciples, the aura of a foundation-building cultivator was naturally very powerful. The steward coughed, and the children immediately stood up and respectfully saluted him. Disciple greets teacher. Our Tao school pursues the way of the celestial being. The so-called Tao is like the laws of heaven and earth. There's a law in the dark. Therefore, although we don't insist on doing good, we can't act recklessly. After listening to the steward's explanation, the child bowed his head and said, "Yes, disciple will earnestly comprehend it." Good, continue. Things are nothing but that. Things are nothing but this. If you see that, you don't see it. If you know it, you know it. This steward was in the 8th layer of the aura refining realm. Judging from his age, he should be in his 40s, so it naturally wouldn't be a problem for him to explain this basic mental cultivation technique. Mo Tienga also didn't interrupt, and just listened silently. It could be seen that the boy who answered at the beginning was quite outstanding when it came to Taoist scriptures. 70 to 80% of the questions asked by the steward were answered by him. However, Mo Tiange also discovered that the others seemed to be very unfriendly towards him. Whenever he answered a question, several people would secretly make faces at him. A slight frown appeared on Mo Tiange's face. Could it be that there were also cases of bullying and humiliation in this school? For hours passed very quickly. Mo Tiange discovered that this errand actually passed time very quickly. She only needed to answer some questions the steward found hard to answer. For her, aura refining realm questions were very simple, so she didn't need to think too much about it. She even had to thank Luo Fengxue for thinking of a good solution for her. After she finished her time at Mengxue Hall, Mo Tiange returned to Shanqing Palace. Once she finished her errands for the day, she went to report to Lord Taoist Jinghe. Master, Lord Taoist Jinghe, who was peeling grapes with his spiritual power, only looked at her. "Oh, you're back." Mo Tiange criticized him inwardly. This is a nascent soul cultivator who has nothing better to do, peeling grapes all day long. Nevertheless, she still looked well-behaved on the surface. "Yes, master. I've finished my errands for today." Finished. Lord Taoist Jinghe propped himself up and sat up. He said to her with great interest, "Tell me about it." Mo Tiange braced herself and said, "The steward's hall arranged for me to go to Mengxue Hall, so I went. I mainly had to answer some questions from new disciples." "Mengxue Hall?" Lord Taoist Jinghe nodded carelessly. "It was arranged by that girl Fengxue, wasn't it?" "Yes, I thought so. Aside from that girl, who else would think of letting you go to Mengxue Hall? That's for the best. New disciples will leave Mengxue Hall sooner or later, and at that time." Mo Tiange pricked up her ears. Could it be that there's a purpose to this arrangement? Unfortunately, Lord Taoist Jinghe didn't say anything more. He once again glared at her and said, "Why are you standing there in a daze? Quickly go and cultivate." "Yes." Mo Tiange swallowed her words sullenly. I don't need to think too highly of this master. He's just torturing me." From then on, Mo Tiange repeated these days, collecting heavenly dew, taking care of spiritual plants, tidying up the beast yard, going to Mengxue Hall, and cultivating. Day after day, she became familiar with all the affairs in Shanqing Palace. Because she stayed in Mengxue Hall for a long time, she also became familiar with the affairs in Clear Spring Peak. Because of this, she somewhat understood why Lord Taoist Jinghe arranged these things for her to do. She had been in Xianxing school for 7 years, but 2 of them were in the foundation building realm, and 2 of them were missing. In the remaining 3 years, she was in closed-door meditation all day and didn't integrate into the school at all. Now, she took care of Shanqing Palace's affairs every day and came into contact with cultivators in Mengxue Hall. She gradually became familiar with Clear Spring Peak and slowly became a real disciple of Xianxing School. Now that she understood all this, her feelings towards Lord Taoist Jinghe were complicated. This master almost never gave her pointers and didn't give her medicinal pills or treasures. Instead, he used this kind of method to correct her cultivation path. She was now 27 years old, but she was already in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. What she lacked wasn't medicinal pills or treasures, but the growth of her mental state. In particular, from the early stage to the middle stage of the foundation building realm, she didn't experience any hardships and didn't have enough mental experience. With such an unstable cultivation level, it was easy to breed inner demons. Inner demons were the most terrifying hurdle on the road to the core formation realm and the nascent soul realm. Although he didn't say it explicitly, this cheap master actually had great expectations for her. Under a tree in Mengxue Hall, a 10-year-old boy was reading Taoist scriptures diligently. As the Tao, don't bother with the formula and keep the truth. All the joints in the Niwen have a spirit. The spirit of the hair is blue, the word Taiyuan. The spirit of the brain, the word Niwen. The spirit of the eyes, the word Xian. The spirit of the nose, the word Yulong. The word Lingjian. the spirit of the ears, the word enchanting, the word divine ability, the word life, the word genuine. His cultivation level was only in the first layer of the aura refining realm. He was only the most ordinary new disciple in Xianqing school and was still studying Taoist scriptures. But his hard work was also obvious to all. Apart from the daily morning classes, he spent the rest of his time reading Taoist scriptures. He had only been in the sect for 2 years, but he had already surpassed many ordinary disciples who were 15 or 16 years old. It had only been 2 years since he entered the school, but he had already surpassed many ordinary disciples who were 15 or 16 years old. Now, it was almost time for class to start. He seized the last bit of time he had to memorize this passage. As the Tao, don't bother with the formula and keep the truth. All the joints in the Niwen have the spirit. The boy turned his head and saw 5 or 6 boys about his age making faces at him from a few meters away. One of the chubby boys shouted, "Yizhenji, your pants fell." Right after he said that, the other boys burst out laughing. The boy named Yizhenji glared at them fiercely, then turned around and continued to memorize. As the Tao, don't bother with the formula and keep the truth. Another plum flew over and hit him squarely. Although he had spiritual aura in his body, these boys weren't ordinary people. They used spiritual aura to hit him with plums, so it was really painful. Yi Jinji understood he couldn't memorize anymore, so he put the book away and turned around with a fierce expression. "What do you want to do?" However, although he looked fierce, the others weren't scared. The chubby boy made faces at his companions. "Look, he's trying to scare us." Someone immediately pointed at him and laughed at him. "Yi Jinji, aren't you afraid your pants will fall again?" Yi Jinji's expression darkened, but he knew he couldn't beat them. Many of them were the descendants of the martial uncles in the school. They had been taught since they were young, so their cultivation levels were higher than his. He couldn't even beat one of them. Seeing that he didn't speak, the boys simply threw another plum at him. "Why aren't you dodging? Aren't you very powerful?" No matter what the teacher asked, you always answered. "What? You don't dare to do it now? Why are you being polite with him? Let's beat him up first. I've been so annoyed by him these past few days." An impetuous boy jumped out and shouted while pointing at him. The children were provoked and swarmed up to her. Yi Jinji immediately turned around and ran. He knew he couldn't beat them, but he also didn't want to be beaten by them. If he ran to the front, they wouldn't dare to beat him because there were others around. But he didn't realize this idea. Before he could run far, he was hit by a plum, causing him to stagger. One of the boys immediately grabbed his sleeve, and the boys surrounded him and started beating him. These boys were smart and knew they couldn't act recklessly, so they only used their fists and feet without using spiritual aura. However, this made him feel even more pain. Yi Jinji was surrounded in the middle. He held his head, gritted his teeth, and didn't say a word. It was just pain. He'd be fine once he endured it. In any case, he was already used to it, and Mo Tinga frowned. She just came to Mingxua Hall early, but she unexpectedly saw such a scene. She gently flicked her sleeves, and the children who were punching and kicking the boys in a circle immediately felt a strong wind sweep over them, and they were immediately knocked to the ground. Who? Who? A chubby boy crawled up and shouted angrily. "Who dares to hit me? I'll call my father." "How about calling your father?" Mo Tinga looked at him coldly and took over the conversation. It was only then that the children saw her. They were instantly tongue-tied. Mo, Grandmaster Mo Tinga knew many of these children were juniors of cultivators in the school, so they developed arrogant and willful temperaments. She just didn't expect them to be arrogant to this extent. At such a young age, they already knew how to bully their fellow disciples. "What are you waiting for? Go to the training office and receive your punishment." "Grandmaster Mo." Upon hearing what she said, the children shouted, "We're just..." Unfortunately, they couldn't even defend themselves. Mo Tinga didn't intend to listen to them. She helped the beaten boy up, turned her head, and said, "Hurry up and go." "Yes." The children left unhappily. They weren't stupid. Grandmaster Mo was Patriarch Jinghe's advanced inner disciple, so they didn't dare to say anything to Grandmaster Mo despite their status. If they made Grandmaster Mo angry again, their punishment would be even heavier. Mo Tinga turned her head to look at the child she helped up. She had some impression of this child because every time she gave sermons, he repeatedly answered questions and was praised by the cultivator in charge. The cultivator in charge once told her this child came from the secular world. He had no foundation and his aptitude was ordinary, so he wasn't valued much. However, he was very hardworking and knew how to work hard. People like him would most likely achieve something. At that moment, the child looked up and saluted her. "Thank you for saving me." Grandmaster Mo Tinga showed a faint smile. She cast a small spell to heal the bruises on his body. "What's going on? Do they often beat you?" Yijinji looked at her cautiously and nodded slightly. Then why didn't you say anything?" Yijinji's expression darkened. He answered that they all have backers. "I don't, so it's useless to say anything." Upon hearing this, Mo Tinga couldn't help but sigh. Even Xianxing School couldn't avoid this kind of problem. Disciples without foundation would inevitably be bullied. "Then don't you feel bad about being beaten by them?" The child bit his lip and nodded cautiously. "I'm not afraid. When I succeed in my cultivation, they naturally won't dare to bully me anymore." What he said was quite ambitious. Mo Tinga nodded inwardly and said with a smile, "When you succeed in your cultivation, you're only in the first layer of the aura refining realm right now, and your aptitude is also ordinary. How long do you want to wait?" Her words made Yijinji hang his head. He also knew his chances were slim, but if he didn't think that way, what else could he do? Mo Tinga couldn't help but think of herself. Didn't she also think the same way? Although her aptitude wasn't good and her path to immortality was uncertain, she firmly believed she'd succeed, even though sometimes she also felt it was hopeless. She became a little interested in this child and asked, "What's your name?" "Yijinji." Yi as in, Zhan as in real, and Ji as in fated chance. Yijinji. "Turns out your surname is Yi," Mo Tinga said. "In that case, we could be considered half from the same clan." Yijinji was surprised. "Grandmaster Mo, isn't your surname Mo?" Mo Tinga smiled. "I follow my mother's surname. My father's surname is actually Yi." "Oh," Mo Tinga smiled again and said, "If they bully you again next time, just come and tell me." "Huh?" Yijinji suddenly raised his head and stared at her in astonishment. He was grateful to be saved by Grandmaster Mo, but he didn't have much hope. It was just this time, after those people were punished, they'd still bully him in the future. After all, Grandmaster Mo wasn't anyone to him. But now, Grandmaster Mo said this. "Grandmaster Mo, you mean?" Mo Tinga repeated patiently. "If they beat you again in the future, just come and tell me. I'll help you." Yijinji immediately jumped up upon hearing her confirmation. "Really? Grandmaster Mo, you'll help me and won't let them bully me again?" The child's face instantly bloomed with joy. "Grandmaster Mo, you're really good to me. Ever since I left home, no one has been this good to me. Ever since I came here, they've been bullying me. They secretly cut my belt, causing me to drop my pants in front of everyone." At this point, he was a little embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Grandmaster Mo. I shouldn't have said this in front of you." It doesn't matter. Since she had nothing to do, Mo Tinga didn't mind listening to a child's complaints. "If you have anything to say, just say it." And this child probably hadn't complained to anyone before, so he immediately became a chatterbox. "While I was at home, my father always said how good it was to cultivate. He said our family was originally a cultivation clan, but it declined, so we had no choice but to move to the secular world. Since I was a child, I've always yearned to cultivate. Later, a martial uncle happened to pass by and discovered I had spiritual roots, so I followed him to Xianxing School. But now, I feel cultivators are very annoying." Chapter 140. Mo Tinga's heart skipped a beat. She asked, "Where's your home?" Yijinji widened his eyes in confusion. "My home," Mo Tinga repeated. "Your home in the secular world." Although he didn't understand what this grandmaster wanted to do, he still answered honestly, My home is in Tong and City in Wagwa. Have you heard of it, Grandmaster? Tong and City in Wagwa. Mo. Tinga muttered and frowned. It seemed to be the one second uncle mentioned. She asked again, do you know the name Yi Chung? Yi Zhenji looked confused. I think Patriarch Grandpa's name is Yi Chung, but I'm not sure. Patriarch Grandpa. Second uncle moved Yi clan out of Mount Qingming about 20 years ago. At that time, the Patriarch Yi Chung, who stayed in the secular world, was in his 40s and had very weak 5 spiritual roots. Now, he should be in his 60s. Tell me about your family. Let me hear about it. A hint of vigilance appeared in Yi Zhenji's eyes. Grandmaster, what do you want to hear? How could Mo Tinga not see that this child was wary of her? She smiled and said, could it be that there's something in your family that I covet? Just tell me. Yi Zhenji thought about it and felt that it was reasonable. This Grandmaster was the advanced inner disciple of a nascent soul cultivator. What could his declining family have that could attract her attention? He asked, Grandmaster, what do you want to know? Just tell me. For example, what's the situation of your family? Did you also live in Kanwu? And when he mentioned his family's past, a smile appeared on Yi Zhenji's face. He said proudly, my father said our family used to be in Kanwu, and our ancestors even produced many core formation cultivators. In the end, there was a granduncle who formed his gold core when he was just over 100 years old. At that time, he was famous in West Kanwu. At this point, a regretful expression appeared on his little face. But this granduncle also passed away more than 20 years ago. There weren't many people in our family, and there weren't many people with spiritual roots, so our family declined just like that. So, there are no cultivators in your family now? Not really. Yi Zhenji tilted his head and said, in fact, I'm not sure. My father said that at that time, there was another granduncle who was a foundation establishment cultivator, and he left after sending us to the secular world. However, that granduncle is old and hasn't contacted us for so many years, so we don't know if he's still around. Didn't your granduncle leave behind any message talismans? I don't know. These are all things that happened before I was born. My father didn't tell me anything. It was normal for the child not to know such a question. Mo Tinga had already made up her mind, so she no longer said anything. She raised her finger and forced out a drop of blood. With a wave of her spiritual aura, that drop of blood immediately rushed towards the child. Grandmaster Yi Zhenji turned pale with fright. However, before he could finish speaking, the drop of blood already entered the space between his eyebrows and disappeared without a trace. Mo Tinga sensed that her blood essence entered the space between his eyebrows without any hindrance at all. It easily fused with him. This child was indeed her blood relative. Grandmaster, Yi Zhenji sobered up and stared at her in horror. What's this? As Mo Tinga stared at the child, she was also a bit surprised. Kunwu was so big, but Yi Clan's child actually happened to come to Xianxing school. This is a drop of blood identification. Yi Zhenji was bewildered. Drop of blood identification? My blood essence is compatible with yours, and there's no rejection at all. This means we're blood relatives. Yi Zhenji was completely dumbfounded. Mo Tinga stared at him. I don't know how we should address each other, but the core formation granduncle you mentioned died more than 20 years ago should be my father. Asterisk, 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 Martial uncle, your Xiaoqin was stunned to see Mo Tinga leading a boy into the side hall of Shanqing Palace. Ever since Mo Tinga taught them a lesson, Qin, Qi, Shu, and Hua became obedient. Even the other 12 people who heard about her methods also became a lot more restrained. They no longer gossiped in front of her, and their speech and behavior also became respectful and courteous. Mo Tinga faintly glanced at her. This is my grandnephew. I brought him here to pay respects to Master. Grandnephew? Xiaoqin was stunned. This martial uncle Mo just went to Mengxua Hall and brought back a grandnephew? Nevertheless, she was smart and didn't say much. She just bowed and said, yes, Grandmaster is still in the main hall. Martial uncle can go and pay respects to him. Mo Tinga didn't linger and walked around Xiuqin while holding Yizhenji's hand. Yizhenji was very excited. He turned to look at Xiuqin, and when they were far away, he whispered, "Grandmaster, you're so proud. Last time, I saw Grandmaster Jinghe's martial uncle come to Mengxua Hall to pass a message, but he didn't even look at our manager." Mo Tiange smiled. The manager of Mengxua Hall was only an ordinary early-stage foundation building cultivator, so how could he enter these women's eyes? They'd been with nascent soul grandmasters for a long time, so they didn't even pay attention to ordinary core formation cultivators. Yizhenji looked around again, feeling very curious. Ever since he came to Xinqing School, he'd only been to the main hall on the main peak once and spent the rest of his time in Mengxua Hall. He hadn't even seen an ordinary foundation building martial uncle's immortal's cave, let alone a nascent soul grandmaster's immortal's cave. Mo Tiange couldn't help but smile as she looked at his innocent and happy appearance. This child had been very excited ever since he recognized himself as his relative. He originally thought he didn't have any backing and would definitely be bullied by others. Unexpectedly, in the blink of an eye, he had a grandmaster who was related to him by blood. Those children who bullied him before couldn't compare to him, so he was so happy that he didn't know what to say. She recalled how Yi Zhenji proudly stuck out his chest when she explained the reason to the cultivator in charge of Mengxua Hall, which made her feel both funny and pitiful. "Zhenji, our seniority can't be determined in a short time. I'm only 10 years older than you, so you can just call me Annie. There's no need to call me Grandmaster." "Oh." Yi Zhenji raised his head to look at her, then called out in a low voice, "Auntie." Mo Tiange smiled and stroked his head. "You don't have to be so reserved. We're relatives, so we're different from them." Yizhenji finally became a bit more courageous. "I understand. Auntie, can I follow you in the future? And you should be able to, but before that, I have to report to the Grandmaster." In fact, Mo Tiange also wasn't sure. Her identity now was indeed different. Taking care of a blood-related junior shouldn't be a big problem, but she was now living in Lord Daoist Jinghe's Immortal's Cave, and this master of hers wasn't serious. She really couldn't say for sure. "Andy," Yizhenji raised his head to look at her, then asked worriedly, "Won't this make things difficult for you?" Mo Tiange was stunned. Just now, she unconsciously frowned, but this child was actually so sharp. Yizhenji said, "Auntie, if you're in trouble, you don't have to worry about me. Now that they know you're my granduncle, they won't dare to bully me anymore." Seeing the child's serious expression, Mo Tiange smiled and answered seriously, "You don't have to worry. You'll understand after you meet the Grandmaster." And, as they spoke, the two of them arrived at the main hall. In Shanqing Palace, aside from Lord Daoist Jinghe himself, there were only the maids and her, so there was no need for anyone to report to them. Leading Yizhenji into the main hall, Mo Tiange saw that Lord Daoist Jinghe was still lying on his dragon chair, enjoying the service of the maids while flipping through an unknown book. He was also mumbling something. "Master." Lord Daoist Jinghe didn't even raise his head. "Oh, you're back. Why did you bring back a little guy today?" Mo Tiange let go of Yizhenji's hand and signaled him with her eyes. The child very cleverly knelt down and kowtowed. "Yizhenji greets the Grandmaster." Mo Tiange said, "Master, this child is related to me by blood. I want to bring him back to teach him personally. I sincerely ask for your permission." Lord Daoist Jinghe was surprised. He then turned around and casually waved his hand at Yizhenji, signaling him to stand up. Then he turned to Mo Tiange. "What's going on? Where did this child come from?" Mo Tiange patiently reported, "When I went to Mengxua Hall today, this child happened to be bullied by others, so I conveniently saved him. Unexpectedly, this child actually came from my clan in the secular world." "Oh, what a coincidence." Lord Daoist Jinghe wasn't interested in these trivial matters of the branch family. However, when he saw Yi Zhenji standing up and shrinking behind Mo Tiange timidly, his interest was piqued. "Little fella, come here and let Grandmaster have a look." Yi Zhenji raised his head to look at Mo Tiange. It was only after he saw her nod that he carefully moved to Lord Daoist Jingha's side. He had never seen a nascent Soul Realm patriarch before. How imposing. The little guy looks pretty good. He looks like you. As Lord Daoist Jingha spoke, he grabbed Yi Zhenji's wrist. Your aptitude is a bit lacking. You have 3 spiritual roots, and, fortunately, all of your spiritual roots are fine, so building your foundation shouldn't be a problem. If you work hard, there's also hope for you to form your gold core. Yi Zhenji widened his eyes. He wasn't sad at all that the sovereign said his aptitude was a bit lacking because disciples who could enter Xianxing school all had excellent aptitudes. He only had 3 spiritual roots, so he could only be considered barely qualified. However, the ancestral master said that if he worked hard, he would be able to form his gold core. This was something he had never thought of. That'll do. This kind of trivial matter, do as you see fit. Lord Daoist Jingha let go of Yi Zhenji's hand and lay back down. You haven't formed your gold core yet, so you don't have the qualifications to accept disciples. Just leave him by your side for now. Mo Tiange was delighted to receive his consent. Thank you, master. Hee, thank me? Girl, you've been cursing me behind my back a lot. Forget it. Lord Daoist Jingha waved his hand. Go. Mo Tiange didn't feel embarrassed, even though she was exposed in public. In any case, it was a fact that this cheap master of hers didn't act respectfully. She only saluted him one last time, then took Yi Zhenji away. Zhenji, now that the sovereign has agreed, you can stay by my side from now on. I'll try my best to help you, but you also have to work hard, understand? And Yi Zhenji's face flushed with excitement. A nascent soul sovereign. He actually met a nascent soul sovereign. He thought for a moment, then asked, Auntie, do I still have to go to Mengshua Hall in the future? Of course, Mo Tiange said, you haven't finished learning the Taoist scriptures, so you still have to go. What? You don't want to go? No. Yi Zhenji repeatedly waved his hand, revealing a slightly embarrassed smile. He then secretly said, Andy, I actually want to go. I have Annie now, so Jian and the others won't dare to bully me anymore. I just want to go and see their faces. Mo Tiange couldn't help but laugh when she heard what he said. Sure enough, he was still a child. He was bullied in the past, but now he wanted to hold his head high. Mo Tiange nodded. There's nothing wrong with being quick to repay gratitude and enmity. But you mustn't be too stubborn, understand? And when they arrived at Mingxin residence, Mo Tiange opened a restriction. After thinking for a moment, she took out a blank jade tablet and engraved some instructions on it. She then handed it to Yi Zhenji. In the future, use this to open the defensive formation. Once they entered Mingxin residence, a small spiritual beast pounced on them and squeaked, startling Yi Zhenji. Mo Tiange said to Yi Zhenji, This is Auntie's spiritual beast. You can call it Xiaowa. It's very smart, and its cultivation level is equivalent to an early-stage foundation-building cultivator. In the future, if you need anything, you can call it. She then crouched down and stroked the Inferno Beast's head. This is Zhenji. He's my nephew. In the future, treat him like you treat me, understand? The Inferno Beast squeaked again and intimately bit the hem of Yi Zhenji's robe. It didn't stop until Yi Zhenji also stroked its head. Mo Tiange smiled. She took out a jade bottle and poured several medicinal pills into it. Eat them and go play. If you want to go to the back mountain, that's fine. The Inferno Beast rolled its tongue and swallowed the medicinal pills. It then nodded at her and ran out of Mingxin residence, probably heading towards the spiritual beast courtyard in the back mountain. This Inferno Beast cultivation level rose very quickly. Ever since they moved to Shanqing Palace, Missouri Tiange let it roam freely, so it often ran to the back mountain to play. Because there were restrictions in the Immortal's Cave, Mo Tiange also let it go. After leading Yi Zhenji into the courtyard, Mo Tiange introduced everything to him one by one. This is Auntie's Immortal's Cave. This is the concocting room. This is the tool refining room. And this is the cultivation room. As for this resting room, it'll be yours from now on. If you need anything, you can just ask the martial uncles here. They're the Grandmaster's maids, so all the affairs in Shangqing Palace are managed by them. Got it, Annie. Yi Jinji stood in the resting room and carefully touched the bed made of cold jade. There weren't many things in the room, but everything was so exquisite that he couldn't help but stare. Where's your luggage? Upon hearing Mo Tinga's question, Yi Jinji took off the Chinquan bag hanging from his waist and poured out the things somewhat embarrassedly. There were some clothes, a few Taoist scriptures and mental cultivation techniques, some children's toys, 3 spirit stones, and several worn-out jade bottles. Mo Tinga opened them to take a look. There were healing medicinal pills and aura-nourishing pills, but there were only 2 or 3 of them. Among them, there was even an aura-nourishing pill that seemed to be half-eaten. Yi Jinji seemed to feel his things were too shabby, so he said with a red face, "Auntie, when I left home, there wasn't much left in the house. I only left these few things, and Grandpa Patriarch gave them all to me." Mo Tinga smiled. Presumably, those people in the Yi clan with meager spiritual roots were still unwilling to leave, so even though they stayed in the secular world, they still cultivated. Moreover, most of the valuable things were with second uncle, so they originally didn't have anything valuable. After 20 years, it was very normal for there to be nothing left. She thought for a moment, then took out 7 or 8 jade bottles from her Chinquan bag. These 2 bottles contain aura-nourishing pills. There are 100 pills in each bottle. You should know how to use them. These are aura-converging pills. There are also medicinal pills for cultivation, and their effects are 10 times better than aura-nourishing pills. However, you'd better increase your cultivation level before taking them. The medicinal effects are too strong, and your current cultivation level is too low. These are aura-purifying pills. For every 10 aura-nourishing pills you take, you'll have to take 1 to expel pill toxins. These are refreshing pills. They're used to detoxify poisons. Presumably, all the poisons you've come into contact with can be detoxified with these pills. These are restorative panaceas. You'll use up all your spiritual aura in a fight of magical powers. So, taking 1 can restore a lot of your spiritual aura. These are mind-clearing pills. They're used to calm the mind. If you feel uneasy, you can take 1. Seeing that Yi Jinji's hands were trembling while holding the jade bottles, Mo Tinga smiled and took out a small pouch. There are 200 spirit stones in here. I know you new disciples haven't graduated from Mengxua Hall yet, so you can't get a disciple's share. I'll give you these first for your cultivation. He only had 2 spirit stones in his possession, and he was reluctant to use them for a long time. Now that he suddenly received 200 spirit stones, Yi Jinji was completely dumbfounded. But it wasn't over yet. Mo Tinga thought for a moment, then took out the greenwood sword and the spirit-gathering pearl she no longer used. Touching these 2 things, she heaved a soft sigh. The spirit-gathering pearl wasn't a good thing, but it was left behind by her father. Moreover, it also guided her on the path of cultivation. After thinking for a while, she put it away and replaced it with a spirit-gathering formation she made herself. This is the greenwood sword. My second uncle passed it on to me. Now I'll pass it on to you. This thing has been refined by a core formation cultivator, so ordinary spirit tools can't compare to it. You have to use it well. As for this spirit-gathering formation, when you cultivate, you can place it in the surroundings to increase the density of spiritual aura. Yi Jinji received these things in a daze. Although he was only a new disciple, after entering Xianxing school, he still had some experience. He had seen spirit tools in the hands of fellow disciples, but they hadn't graduated from Mengxua Hall, so the school wouldn't give them spirit tools. Those who could have spirit tools were all people with powerful backgrounds. A small disciple from the secular world like him could only look at them with envy. However, this greenwood sword was obviously a high-grade spirit tool. It was much better than the ones he had seen before. Auntie, this is a lot. Since you're my relative, I'll naturally give you the best. Mo Tinga's expression turned serious. However, you also have to remember that you can only rely on yourself to walk on the path of cultivation. If you're complacent and don't move forward, then no matter how many treasures you have, it'll be useless. Yi Jinji was startled by Mo Tinga's stern shout, but he soon regained his composure. He obediently lowered his head and said, "I understand. I'll cultivate diligently and live up to Auntie's expectations." Tinga was very satisfied that this child was so obedient. She stroked his head and said, "All right, Auntie's going to cultivate. It's good for you to cultivate and familiarize yourself with it first. If you need anything, just call me outside the cultivation room." "Yes." Tinga turned around and was about to leave, but Yi Zhenji hastily called out, "Auntie." Tinga stopped. When she saw Yi Zhenji looking at her, she blushed and said in a low voice, "I'm hungry." Stunned, she couldn't help but knock her own head, then said with a smile, "Auntie hasn't eaten for a long time, so I forgot you still need to eat. Wait a moment, I'll call someone to bring you some food." After returning to the cultivation room, Tinga first sent a summoning talisman to Xiuqin, asking her to call someone to bring her food every day. After that, she arranged a formation and entered the virtual sky world. Standing inside the virtual sky world, she felt the gentle breeze and exhaled. However, she didn't immediately enter the hut to cultivate. Instead, she sat down by the stream. She didn't expect to run into someone from Yi Clan. She never grew up in Yi Clan, so Yi Clan only existed in her imagination. However, before second uncle passed away, he always told her to take care of Yi Clan if she had the ability in the future. Now that she ran into a child from Yi Clan, she naturally couldn't ignore him. This child told her that Yi Clan lived a good life in the secular world. There were still several cultivators in the clan. Although their cultivation levels were low and not worth mentioning in Kunwu, they were immortals in the eyes of mortals. Yi Clan quickly gained a foothold in Wei country. Now, they were rich and healthy, and they even became Marquis Changningho in Wei country. Hearing this, Tinga felt relieved. In the past, Yi Clan was forced to move to the secular world because apart from second uncle, they didn't have any real cultivators. Even if they had spiritual roots, they only had 5 spiritual roots and could barely reach the second or third layer of the aura refining realm by relying on medicinal pills. However, living in the secular world was already enough. Far away from the bloody storms of the cultivation world, they could still enjoy glory, splendor, wealth, and rank in the secular world. What else could they ask for? Even if Lord Daoist Jinghe's clan in the secular world produced a nascent soul cultivator and a core formation cultivator, it was still just an ordinary rich clan. At first, those people from Yi Clan also gave up. However, 10 years ago, Yi Zhenji was born and was unexpectedly tested to have 3 spiritual roots. Yi Clan was wild with joy. Later, when Xianxin school disciples ran errands in the secular world, the patriarch of Yi Clan treated Yi Zhenji with a lot of money, so Yi Zhenji was able to return to Kunwu and even entered a famous clan. This matter was only a trivial matter, so even the Stewards Hall of Clear Spring Peak didn't know Yi Zhenji's identity and origin. Thus, they didn't report it to Lord Daoist Jinghe or Master Daoist Shoujing, so Tinga naturally had no way of knowing. If it wasn't for Lord Daoist Jinghe tormenting her and Luo Fengxue making her go to Mengxue Hall, she would have probably waited until she formed her gold core and went to the secular world to fulfill second uncle's wish before she learned of Yi Zhenji's existence. At that time, if Yi Zhenji's luck wasn't good, he might have already become old. Yi Clan racked their brains to send Yi Zhenji to Xianxin school. First, they didn't want to waste Yi Zhenji's talent. Second, they probably wanted to revitalize their clan. However, Yi Zhenji's spiritual roots were only ordinary. He was already very lucky to be able to enter a big cultivation group, so Yi Clan didn't have any delusions. However, because of this, Tinga had another thought. It had only been a few years since Yi Clan left Kunwu, so they obviously still wanted to return to Kunwu. If they found out about her existence, she was afraid they might have some other thoughts. Thinking up to this point, Tinga made a decision. That being the case, she didn't plan to let Yi Clan know of her existence for the time being. If they found out, some troubles would inevitably arise. Of course, she didn't want to hide it forever. When the time was right, she would go back to Yi Clan and tell them second uncle's last wish. But in that case, she would inevitably warn Yi clan that if they didn't have enough high-level cultivators, they shouldn't think about returning to Kunwu. How many small cultivation clans have been wiped out in Kunwu? Yi clan from Danding School still had several foundation-building cultivators, but after a disaster, they declined just like that. Mo Tiange didn't know whether they could survive or not. In that case, it would be better to stay in the secular world and enjoy glory, splendor, wealth, and rank. If they produced a descendant with good spiritual roots, she would naturally lend a helping hand. Mo Tiange shook her head and threw these thoughts to the back of her mind. She stood up and returned to the small room inside the virtual sky world, preparing to cultivate. Yi Zhenji hadn't even finished reading the Taoist scriptures, so he still had a long way to go. When the time came, she would give him some medicinal pills and ask her master to help him. Presumably, building his foundation wouldn't be a problem, and he might even have a high chance of forming his gold core. After making this decision, Mo Tiange sat down, sank her aura into her dantian, and started today's cultivation. Chapter 141. Auntie. Upon hearing Yi Zhenji's cheerful voice, Mo Tiange came out of the virtual sky world and opened the cultivation room's restriction with a wave of her hand. With a smile on his face, Yi Zhenji bumped into her. "What's wrong?" Yi Zhenji ran over and looked up at her. "Auntie, I went to Mingxua Hall today. When Jian and the others saw me, they all ran far away. It was so funny." Mo Tiange smiled and stroked his head. "Are you very happy?" Yi Zhenji nodded vigorously. "I've always thought that when I built my foundation, I'd beat them all to the ground so they wouldn't dare to bully me." Mo Tiange smiled. When she was in Mo family's village, she also had the same idea. She wanted to read good books, listen to her mother, and when she grew up, she would teach Tianjun and the others a lesson. In the end, Tianjun didn't bully her anymore, and she also walked on a different path. Although they don't dare to bully you now, you still have to work hard to build your foundation. You can't always rely on others, understand? And, Auntie, I'll work hard to cultivate and won't embarrass you, Yi Zhenji said earnestly. "I know my aptitude isn't good, but before I came to Kunwu, Grandpa Patriarch told me that hard work can make up for my lack of talent. As long as I cultivate hard, I still have hope of advancing. It's good that you understand." Mo Tiange nodded with a smile. "At first, my aptitude was worse than yours, but in the end, I still built my foundation. Therefore, although aptitude is important, hard work and fated chances can't be underestimated." Yi Zhenji blinked. He understood the second half, but what did the first half mean? "Annie, they said you were accepted as a disciple by the Grandmaster when you were only in the foundation building realm, because your aptitude was higher than that of a single spiritual root. Why did you say your aptitude was bad? If your aptitude was bad, the Grandmaster wouldn't have accepted you as a disciple, right?" Both of these sentences are correct. Any spiritual root is a very special kind of spiritual root. Before I built my foundation, I always thought my aptitude was bad, but after I built my foundation, I realized that wasn't the case. "Oh, but if that's the case, you were able to build your foundation because your aptitude is good, right?" This question startled Mo Tiange. The vision triggered during her foundation building had indeed made her suspicious for a very long time. Mo Tiange didn't know whether her success in building her foundation was related to the spiritual roots of the origin or not. Maybe the art of Sunu also had something to do with it. Although she didn't know what the spiritual roots of the origin were before she built her foundation and considered them to be almost useless spiritual roots, maybe she benefited from the spiritual roots of the origin when she advanced. That's not necessarily the case. Annie also had a hard time cultivating in the chi condensation realm. At that time, it was my second uncle who took care of me and provided me with a large amount of medicinal pills for my cultivation. That's why I was able to reach the foundation building realm one day. Yi Zhenji pondered for a moment, then smiled again. "I understand. Annie has granduncle to take care of her, and I also have Annie to take care of me. I'll work hard to make a realm breakthrough, just like Annie." This child was smart and sensible. He didn't need anyone to take care of him all the time. Just a few words of advice from time to time would do. Mo Tinga chuckled and patted his head. It's good that you know. All right, you've been dawdling for so long. Hurry up and cultivate. All right, I'll go now. Yijinji answered obediently, then went back to cultivate. Mo Tinga closed her eyes and released her divine sense. The cultivation technique Yijinji practiced was the same as that of all new disciples. It was Xianqing school's most basic cultivation technique, the Nanhua Heart Sutra. In fact, all new disciples of Xianqing school, regardless of their aptitude, spiritual roots, or status, had to practice Nanhua Heart Sutra first to lay their foundation. When Mo Tinga entered the school several years ago, although she wasn't a new disciple, she still roughly studied it. This Taoist scripture was indeed an ideal introductory cultivation technique. This cultivation technique didn't require the attribute of one's spiritual roots. The cultivation speed wasn't fast, and it couldn't be used in fights of magical powers. However, it allowed one to comprehend the Tao of heaven and earth, cultivate one's heart, and cultivate one's nature. If one could cultivate Nanhua Heart Sutra properly before practicing other cultivation techniques, there would be a lot fewer barriers to one's nature. Although Yijinji's spiritual roots weren't obvious, he had a good understanding of Taoist scriptures. His nature and perception were also pretty good. Mo Tinga watched him for a while. Seeing that his cultivation was going smoothly, she no longer paid attention to him and entered the virtual sky world to continue cultivating. Time passed quickly. After she finished cultivating, Mo Tinga went to Mengxue school to give Yijinji some pointers, then entered the virtual sky world to cultivate, and so on. After 2 years of peace and tranquility, 2 major events happened on Clear Spring Peak at the same time. The first matter was that Master Taoist Xianin was about to enter closed-door meditation to attack the nascent soul realm. When Mo Tinga learned about this, she was very happy. Senior martial brother Xianin was their master's #1 disciple. Not only was he the earliest to enter the school, but his aptitude was also the best. He was already more than 400 years old now, yet he was still stuck in the core formation realm. Now that he finally entered closed-door meditation to attempt to form his nascent soul, Mo Tinga inwardly prayed that this martial uncle or senior martial brother who always took care of her could smoothly form his nascent soul. If senior martial brother Xianin really succeeded, she would have to call him martial uncle Xianin instead. According to the rules of the immortal cultivation world, once one reached the nascent soul stage, one would be a grandmaster. Although the master who entered the sect was still the master, the disciples of the same sect still had to address each other according to their cultivation level. The other thing was that Taoist Shoujing had been in isolation for 2 years and successfully entered the late stage of the core formation realm. When Mo Tinga heard this, she just smiled and said nothing. Later, when she ran into Luo Fengxue, she tried to sound her out, but she also calmly rejected her. Speaking of which, she still hadn't met this senior martial brother Shoujing. When she officially became her master's disciple 2 years ago, this senior martial brother Shoujing had been in closed-door meditation and rarely left his cave. These 2 things weren't big, but they weren't small either. In the past 2 years, Mo Tinga had been dealing with Xianqing Palace's affairs and gradually got closer to the power center of Xianqing School, so she also learned some things. Xianqing School had a total of 5 nascent soul cultivators. Among them, the head Grand Supreme Elder, Lord Taoist Xinyang, was in the late stage of the nascent soul realm, Lord Taoist Jinghe was in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, and the remaining Lord Taoist Lingxiu, Lord Taoist Miaoi, and Lord Taoist Huayan were in the early stage of the nascent soul realm. Lord Taoist Xinyang was undoubtedly the pillar of Xianqing School, but the other nascent soul cultivators were also the foundation of Xianqing School. Losing one nascent soul cultivator would greatly reduce the school's strength. Right now, Lord Taoist Lingxiu's lifespan was about to run out. In 100 years at most, this Lord Taoist would pass away. This was also the reason why Master Daoist Xianyin was in closed-door meditation to advance to the nascent soul realm, and the reason why he was so happy about Master Daoist Shou Jing advancing to the late stage of the core formation realm. When a nascent soul cultivator passed away, another nascent soul cultivator would be needed to fill the gap to ensure the school's strength and status. Of course, these things had nothing to do with her. Right now, Mo Tiange encountered something that made her not know whether to laugh or cry. Senior Marshal's sister, Mo Tiange, had been very careful since she was ordered to go to the main peak by her master, but she still heard a surprised and gentle call from behind her. She instantly had the urge to step on the white silk handkerchief and fly back to her cave. She adjusted her expression, turned around, and smiled. Junior Marshal Brother Bai. This Junior Marshal Brother Bai wasn't Jean Bai. Although Jean Bai had always been called Little Bai, Marshal Uncle Bai, or Junior Marshal Brother Bai, his surname was Jean. This guy's real surname was Bai, and his name was Yin Fei. He was the disciple of Xianqing School's head Grand Supreme Elder, Lord Daoist Jinyang. He had a single spiritual root that was hard to come by in 100 years. As soon as he entered the school, Lord Daoist Jinyang made an exception and accepted him as his disciple. This Junior Marshal Brother Bai was now 25 years old and had been in the foundation building realm for 3 years. Ever since Mo Tiange was officially accepted as Lord Daoist Jinghe's disciple, almost all the affairs in Shanqing Palace were handed over to her. She was even in charge of some matters related to the Grand Supreme Elders. As a result, she gradually came into contact with the real heavenly favored ones in the school. The so-called heavenly favored ones could be said to be the elite disciples among elite disciples. In Yunwu sect in the past, foundation building cultivators could accept disciples, so elite disciples were only slightly better than ordinary disciples. Big cultivation groups like Xianqing School, on the other hand, were different. Only core formation cultivators were qualified to accept disciples. Needless to say, disciples who could become disciples of core formation cultivators had to have outstanding talents, but they also had to have a good attitude and comprehension. Such elite disciples were naturally much better than ordinary disciples. However, heavenly favored ones could only be called disciples under nascent soul cultivators, and their cultivation levels had to be especially outstanding. For example, there was one in Clear Spring Peak, Master Daoist Shoujing. He started cultivating at the age of 8 and became Lord Daoist Jinghe's disciple as soon as he entered the school. He built his foundation at the age of 20 and formed his gold core at the age of 78. In Xianqing School, he was one of the core formation cultivators most likely to form their nascent souls. Mo Tiange could also be considered a disciple of Lord Daoist Jinghe. She was in the middle stage of the foundation building realm at such a young age and received her master's attention and high hopes. Forming her gold core was only a matter of time, and she might even form her nascent soul. This by Yin Fei was the same. In terms of status, he was the last disciple of the head Grand Supreme Elder, Lord Daoist Jinyang. In terms of cultivation level, he built his foundation at the age of 22 and was now 25. His future was boundless. If it was before, Mo Tiange wouldn't have dared to believe she could make friends with someone with such status. But now, she only had a headache. This was how things started. She was now the one running errands for her master. A few days ago, she happened to go to Lord Daoist Jinyang's Immortals cave to handle some matters for her master. She didn't know what was wrong with this Junior Marshal Brother Bai, but as soon as he saw her, not only was he overly enthusiastic, but he also invited her to meet him from time to time. In the beginning, Mo Tiange didn't think there was any harm in making friends with such a person. Unexpectedly, after several visits, she realized something was wrong. This Junior Marshal Brother Bai obviously didn't treat her as a Senior Marshal's sister and Junior Marshal Brother. He seemed to be pursuing her. Upon realizing this, whenever Bai Yin Fei invited her again, she would find all kinds of reasons to dismiss him. However, for some unknown reason, the more she refused Bai Yin Fei, the more enthusiastic he became. Almost every time she left Shanqing Palace, this person would use all kinds of methods to find out her whereabouts. He would then pretend to stick to her unintentionally, causing Mo Tienga to be afraid to go out recently. But even if he didn't dare to go out, she still had to go out. She had to carry out the things her master told her to do. If she accidentally ran into Bai Yanfei, she could only pretend she didn't know and think of a way to dismiss him. This matter made Mo Tienga feel strange. When she was a teenager, she always disguised as a man. When she came to Xianqing school, she changed her appearance to that of a woman. Moreover, she was always under Lord Taoist Jinghe's protection, so she had never experienced any pursuers. Now that one suddenly came, it made her want to avoid him like the plague. Seeing that she didn't look displeased, Bai Yanfei walked towards her with a smile. He was quite handsome, and he was also Lord Taoist Xinyang's last disciple, so he also had some admirers. However, Mo Tienga didn't have any feelings for him. Senior Marshall's sister Mo Bai Yanfei smiled at her. Long time no see. This time, Mo Tienga indeed hid for a long time. Because of this, she even asked Lord Taoist Jinghe not to go to Mengxua Hall. She holed up in Shangqing Palace every day and didn't go out. No matter what Bai Yanfei's intentions were, he was always polite and courteous to her face. So, Mo Tienga answered with a smile, "It's nothing. I've been practicing a secret technique recently, so I don't have time to go out." "Really?" Bai Yanfei's eyes brightened. "What secret technique is it?" "Senior Marshall's sister. Do you want to study it together?" How could it be called a secret technique if I casually mentioned it? Mo Tienga paused for a moment, then squeezed out a smile. "Junior Marshall Brother Bai, why are you here? Did you come to do something?" "Sort of," Bai Yanfei said vaguely, then said, "Senior Marshall's sister, we haven't seen each other for a long time. Since we ran into each other, how about we have a good gathering? This isn't too convenient, right?" Mo Tienga said, "My master still has something he wants me to do." "Junior Marshall Brother Bai, I'm sorry, but I'll take my leave first." She immediately got on the white silk handkerchief and flew towards Clear Spring Peak. "Senior Marshall's sister," Bai Yanfei called out from behind her. Mo Tienga didn't dare to stay and didn't even look back. She flew back to Clear Spring Peak and rushed into Shangqing Palace. Mo Tienga only heaved a sigh of relief when she saw Bai Yanfei didn't follow her. She was really afraid of this Junior Marshall Brother Bai. She really didn't understand. Although her identity wasn't ordinary now and her aptitude wasn't bad, there were many beautiful and outstanding female cultivators in Xianqing School. Was it necessary for him to chase after her like this? "Why are you burning your buttocks?" Lord Taoist Jinghe's voice rang in her ears. She didn't make it, so she went straight through the main entrance. Once she passed through the main entrance, she saw the main hall. Lord Taoist Jinghe was meditating, which was very rare. Now that he was disturbed by her, he was glaring at her while blowing his beard. "Master," she called out obediently. Lord Taoist Jinghe glared at her and stopped meditating. "What happened? I told you to go to the main peak to pass a message, but you ended up like this? Was there a wolf chasing after you?" "There wasn't a wolf, but there was someone," Mo Tienga answered. She'd been his disciple for a long time, so she didn't mind. She found a seat, sat down, and poured tea for herself. Somewhat, Lord Taoist Jinghe was surprised. "Who was chasing you?" And Mo Tienga only drank half of her tea. She rolled her eyes and told him the truth. It was Junior Marshall Brother Bai Yanfei from Morning Sun Peak. Bai Yanfei, Lord Taoist Jinghe thought for a while. Is he old Taoist Xinyang's disciple? Seeing Mo Tienga nodding, Lord Taoist Jinghe was even more surprised. "Why was he chasing you?" "I also found it strange," Mo Tienga said. "Junior Marshall Brother Bai was too enthusiastic. Ever since I met him, he often invited me out. I didn't want to go. He was doing out of kindness. If I went, I'd be a bit overwhelmed." "Kindness?" Lord Taoist Jinghe immediately understood and snorted. "This brat is really bold. He actually wanted to attack my disciple." "Attack?" Mo Tienga stared at him with a puzzled expression. "Master, Junior Marshall Brother Bai was very good to me. He didn't attack me at all." "Umph." Lord Taoist Jinghe snorted even harder. He curled his lips and glared at her. "Keep pretending. Do you dare to say you didn't say it for me to hear on purpose?" Having been exposed, Mo Tienga immediately became well-behaved. Yes, master. I think this brat is very annoying, but it's not good to directly send him away, so I wanted to ask master to deal with him. Upon hearing what she said, Lord Taoist Jinghe showed an expression that said, "That's more like it." He then raised his head complacently. Don't play tricks in front of master. You're just a little girl who's lived for more than 20 years. What else can you hide from me? Mo Tienga smiled modestly. Yes, but how could I compare to you, master? You've lived for more than 800 years, and you've almost become a demon. Lord Taoist Jinghe felt refreshed after being flattered. However, he only laughed twice when he suddenly realized what she said wasn't quite right. Damn girl, you actually called me an old fart. No way. Mo Tienga immediately clasped her palms together. Master, I'm sincerely expressing my respect and also asking you to help me deal with this matter. Lord Taoist Jinghe's temperament was that he loved to brag and flatter others. Once Mo Tienga assumed this posture, he was immediately appeased. He merely let out a humph and cast her a sidelong glance. His tone became amiable. Tell me, what's going on with this brat? Mo Tienga said, I'm also quite muddle-headed. It's just that when I went to Morning Sun Peak to ask to see Marshal Uncle Xinjiang, Junior Marshal Brother by received me for a while. Later on, he often invited me out. This was the truth. She herself didn't understand what this Junior Marshal Brother by saw in her. Cultivation level? It wasn't that there weren't any young female cultivators in the middle stage of the foundation building realm in the school. Marshal Uncle Meowie of Blue Phoenix Peak had a senior marshal sister in the middle stage of the foundation building realm in her 30s. That senior marshal sister reached this stage through solid cultivation, unlike Mo Tienga, who reached this stage purely because of fated chances. Appearance? Mo Tienga thought her appearance wasn't bad, but in the cultivation world where beauties were as common as clouds, it didn't count as much. Identity? Being the disciple of a nascent soul grandmaster, Lord Taoist Jinghe, was indeed an extremely high identity. But at the same time, whatever she had, that senior marshal sister from Blue Phoenix Peak also had. Furthermore, that senior marshal sister wasn't the only one. Marshal Uncle Lingshu from Drifting Cloud Peak also had a junior marshal sister who was in her early 20s and was even younger than her. Once Mo Tienga finished speaking, Lord Taoist Jinghe pondered for a moment, then nodded. This brat has a bit of insight. My Qin Jinghe's disciple is naturally better than others. Mo Tienga clenched her teeth. Master, upon seeing Mo Tienga's angry gaze, Lord Taoist Jinghe immediately burst into laughter. Don't. Master is praising you. Of the two girls you mentioned, the one under Meowie isn't as beautiful as you, and the one under Old Man Lingshu isn't as smart as you. If the three of them were placed in front of him to choose, he'd definitely choose you. In my opinion, this brat's Tao heart is definitely unstable. Chapter 142. Old Taoist Xinjiang. Lord Taoist Jinghe broke into Lord Taoist Xinjiang's cave in an imposing manner and shouted like an enemy, "Come out!" Lord Taoist Xinjiang's cave was as simple as most cultivators, but it didn't lack anything it should have. As one of the 4 or 5 late-stage nascent soul cultivators in the Celestial Pole and the person with the highest power in Xianqing School, Lord Taoist Xinjiang's cave was naturally heavily guarded with numerous restrictions. If an enemy really came, he wouldn't be able to do anything. However, it was Lord Taoist Jinghe, so the guarding disciples could only helplessly let him come and go as he pleased. Lord Taoist Xinjiang, who was cultivating, opened his eyes and waved his hand to remove the restrictions around him, letting Lord Taoist Jinghe in. Different from Lord Taoist Jinghe's style of a fatuous ruler, Lord Taoist Xinjiang wore a simple sect Taoist robe and tied his hair in a bun. He looked calm and composed, looking like a real expert with a transcendent demeanor. Seeing Lord Taoist Jinghe breaking into his cave, Lord Taoist Xinjiang just raised his eyelids and then lowered them again. His voice was gentle and calm. "What's up? What's up? You're asking me what's up?" Lord Taoist Jinghe yelled, Old Taoist Yin, are you jealous of me because I accepted a genius disciple but don't dare to say it? Not to mention Xianxing school. Perhaps only Lord Taoist Jinghe would talk to Lord Taoist Xinyang like this in the entire celestial pole. Lord Taoist Xinyang was also a genius in the past. He advanced to the nascent soul realm when he was about 200 years old and advanced to the late stage of the nascent soul realm when he was about 600 years old. From then on, he roamed the celestial pole for hundreds of years, and only 3 or 4 late-stage nascent soul cultivators could rival him. The reason why he couldn't be sure was that one of the old monsters in the late stage of the nascent soul realm had been living in seclusion for a long time, and no one knew whether he was still alive or not. As for Lord Taoist Jinghe, his cultivation experience couldn't be regarded as the best in either Xianxing school or the celestial pole. He could only be regarded as excellent. However, only Lord Taoist Jinghe talked like this, and Lord Taoist Xinyang listened. There were reasons for this. First, although Lord Taoist Jinghe's cultivation level was only in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, he was combative by nature and had a deep understanding of fights of magical powers. He had treasures and secret techniques in his hands, so even great cultivators in the late stage of the nascent soul realm wouldn't dare to say they could win against him for sure. Second, his temperament was like this. Lord Taoist Xinyang knew this very well, so why would he fight with him over this trivial matter? Therefore, even though Lord Taoist Jinghe was making a big fuss, Lord Taoist Xinyang still looked indifferent and didn't even glance at him. You have your own disciple, and I have mine. Why should I be jealous of you? Not jealous? Lord Taoist Jinghe sneered. If you're not jealous, why did you let your disciple seduce my disciple? This sentence made Lord Taoist Xinyang a little confused, so he raised his eyelids. Hook up. This choice of words was really inelegant, but Lord Taoist Jinghe continued to sneer. Don't tell me you don't know. You took in a disciple with a single spiritual root and treated him like a treasure. I don't believe you don't know about such a big matter as him seducing my disciple. Lord Taoist Jinghe deliberately emphasized the word big matter. He raised his eyebrows and looked at Lord Taoist Xinyang from the corner of his eyes, meaning, don't try to fool me. You mean Yinfei? Lord Taoist Xinyang raised his eyes. There were only a few disciples with a single spiritual root in Xianxing school, so he only needed to think for a moment to know who Lord Taoist Jinghe was talking about. You're not muddle-headed yet. Lord Taoist Jinghe ridiculed him. Soon after, he said in a seemingly sincere tone, I say, Old Taoist Xinyang, my disciple is very good, but you still have to ask me whether I can seduce him or not. Otherwise, wouldn't it be very bad if we hurt our friendship? Lord Taoist Xinyang wasn't fooled by his words. He just asked, what's going on? Either speak properly or don't waste time. The only person in Xianxing school who could talk to Lord Taoist Jinghe like this was Lord Taoist Xinyang. Lord Taoist Jinghe knew this old Taoist was impatient, so he should stop while he was ahead. He immediately chose to speak nicely. I don't know what wrong medicine your disciple took, but he's been so attentive to my disciple that my disciple doesn't even dare to go out. What? You really don't know? How could I know such a trivial matter? After hearing the whole story, Lord Taoist Xinyang couldn't help but have a headache. This Jinghe was really something. Did he really have to report to his master that his disciple was attentive to a woman who was as free as him? He was already in the nascent soul realm, but he still came to question his disciple over such a trivial matter. Nevertheless, he still slowed down his voice to confirm. You mean Yinfei is pursuing your disciple? And the little disciple you just accepted, right? Yes. Lord Taoist Jinghe nodded, then put his hand on Lord Taoist Xinyang's shoulder. He once again said earnestly, Senior Marshal Brother Xinyang, don't say I didn't give you face. My disciple is good, but I really can't give her to your disciple. Tell your disciple not to worry, okay? Lord Taoist Xinyang was confused. My disciple is unmarried, and your disciple isn't. Is there a problem? Is such a trivial matter worth you coming here in person? Lord Taoist Jinghe was furious. Trivial matter? I'm telling you, this isn't a trivial matter. He looked around mysteriously, then leaned close to Lord Daoist Xingyang and said in a low voice, "This disciple of mine was brought back by my brat. You also know what kind of personality that brat has. It's so rare for him to bring back a girl. Right now, he's in a hurry to form his nascent soul and can't take care of this matter. If I don't take care of her for him, he'll be angry with me when he comes out of closed-door meditation." Lord Daoist Jinghe then added, "You should tell your disciple not to pester my disciple anymore. It's useless even if she thinks about it." Lord Daoist Xingyang already understood what Lord Daoist Jinghe said, but Lord Daoist Jinghe complacently added, which made him unhappy. "Your disciple has his own good points, but my disciple has a single spiritual root that's hard to come by in 100 years. She's young and promising, and her future is bright. Why would he pester your disciple? I think he's just bored and wants to talk to your disciple. You shouldn't think too much about young people's interactions." "I'm thinking too much," Lord Daoist Jinghe shouted. "If I'm really thinking too much, would that brat keep asking my disciple out?" "Old Daoist Xingyang, don't just protect your disciple. Although your disciple has a single spiritual root, compared to my disciple, she's just SOSO. Do you want to know what my disciple's aptitude is?" "Hee, I won't tell you first." Lord Daoist Xingyang's face darkened when he saw Lord Daoist Jinghe blowing his own trumpet. "All right, don't treat your disciple like a treasure. There are many people who want to perform dual cultivation with my disciple. Do you need to rush to please your disciple? What are you worrying about? Hey, old Daoist Xingyang, you're jealous." "Jealous? I'm jealous? I have a disciple with a single spiritual root. Do I need to be jealous of you? Is such a trivial matter worth you coming here in person? Go back." Lord Daoist Xingyang was annoyed that his disciple kept being belittled. He flung his sleeve and ordered him to leave. "Do you think I'll go back just because you tell me to?" Lord Daoist Jinghe argued with him. "I'm telling you, my disciple has the spiritual root of the origin. You know what the spiritual root of the origin is, right? She even obtained the art of the origin and is in the middle stage of the foundation building realm before she's 30. Can your disciple do it? She only has a single spiritual root. She's still far from being able to catch up to my disciple. Spiritual root of the origin." Lord Daoist Xingyang was fuming, but when he heard that, he paused for a moment. "Your disciple has the spiritual root of the origin from the distant past era?" "Yes." Lord Daoist Jinghe raised his head. The next moment, Lord Daoist Xingyang sneered. "So what if she has the spiritual root of the origin? It's been lost for hundreds of thousands of years. I don't know what will happen to it. My disciple has a solid, single spiritual root. She can't be that bad." Old Daoist Xingyang. Lord Daoist Jinghe was waiting for Lord Daoist Xingyang to admit defeat a moment ago, but when he heard what Lord Daoist Jinghe said, he also fumed. What's the use of a single spiritual root? How many of us nascent soul cultivators have single spiritual roots? Old man Song Feng has 3 spiritual roots, but you still can't beat him. Lord Daoist Xingyang was also angry when he heard Lord Daoist Jinghe mentioning this. "When did I lose to him? It's just that the winner hasn't been decided yet." Then he said sarcastically, "Haven't you always looked down on old man Song Feng? Why are you speaking for him now? You also have a single spiritual root. Isn't a single spiritual root good? How did you cultivate it?" "It's because I have a single spiritual root that I don't speak for it." "What's so great about a single spiritual root? Many people with single spiritual roots can't even cultivate to the nascent soul realm." Lord Daoist Jinghe was already pestering him endlessly. Lord Daoist Xingyang was so angry that he laughed. "Qin Jinghe, you're itching for a beating, aren't you? I'll fulfill your wish." As he spoke, he took out something, clasped his hands together, and threw it at Lord Daoist Jinghe. Lord Daoist Jinghe flashed, and a surge of spiritual aura blasted a stone wall into ashes. He was also burning with anger. He took out a gourd, raised it, and a wisp of real fire spurted out of the gourd. He shouted, "Old man Xingyang, if I don't teach you a lesson, you'll really think I'm easy to bully." Lord Daoist Xingyang didn't speak. Instead, he withdrew his magic weapon and attacked again. Mo Tinga naturally didn't know that her casual words caused the two most powerful nascent soul cultivators in Xianxing school to fight each other and almost raze Lord Daoist Xinyan's immortal's cave to the ground. Of course, this was actually because Lord Daoist Jinghe was too good at stirring up trouble. Anything he said would make people unhappy, and it didn't have much to do with her. At that moment, she stepped into Yi Jinji's small room with a solemn expression. 2 years had passed. Yi Jinji had grown a lot taller, and his cultivation level had also improved. A few days ago, he finished his studies at Mengxue Hall and became an official disciple. Because the distribution of elite disciples and ordinary disciples was different, their management methods were also different. Since Yi Jinji lived in Shanqing Palace, the steward's hall couldn't interfere too much, and it was difficult to stop other people's mouths. Thus, Lord Daoist Jinghe waved his hand and directly indicated that Yi Jinji should be recorded as Master Daoist Shoujing's disciple. Mo Tiange originally didn't approve of this. Why should she record a child she taught herself as someone else's disciple? Especially when that person basically didn't care about him. But Lord Daoist Jinghe said that she was only in the middle stage of the foundation building realm now. No matter how fast her cultivation was, it would still take her 50 to 60 years to form her gold core. By that time, Yi Jinji should have already built his foundation. The method of distributing foundation building pills to elite disciples and ordinary disciples was also different. Did Lord Daoist Jinghe want to drag him into building his foundation? For this reason, Mo Tiange could only acquiesce. Now, Yi Jinji still lived here and hadn't even seen his nominal master. Mo Tiange walked to the frost jade bed and saw Yi Jinji lying on the bed. She frowned slightly and helped the child up. She placed her hand on the top of his head and inserted her spiritual aura into his body. After a long time, Yi Jinji groaned and woke up. When he saw her, he called out in a low voice, "Andy." Mo Tiange let go of him and said, "Aren't you going to take some medicine to heal your injuries?" Yi Jinji's face reddened. He hurriedly took out some medicinal pills and ate them, then sat cross-legged. Mo Tiange stayed by his side, quietly observing his condition. Just now, when she was cultivating, she used her divine sense to pay attention to the outside world. Suddenly, she noticed spiritual aura fluctuations here. After careful examination, she found that the spiritual aura inside Yi Jinji's body was in disorder and showed signs of being possessed by the devil. Just now, when she placed her hand on the top of Yi Jinji's head, she immediately realized what was wrong. This child obviously ate several aura-converging pills. The medicinal power was too strong, and he couldn't control it. So he almost suffered from the devil. Before long, the spiritual aura inside Yi Jinji's body finally calmed down. When he opened his eyes, he saw Mo Tiange standing in front of him with a gloomy expression. He immediately lowered his head and said, "Auntie, I'm sorry." Mo Tiange regained her composure and shook her head. "Sorry for what? I made you worry." Mo Tiange sighed and sat next to him. "What does it matter if you made me worry? In the end, you'll be the one to bear the consequences. You didn't cultivate for me. You cultivated for yourself." "Yes," Yi Jinji answered. He then hesitated and asked, "Auntie, don't you blame me?" "Blame you for what?" Just now, something happened because I ate aura-converging pills. Don't you blame me for acting recklessly?" Mo Tiange smiled. "What's the use of blaming you? The most important thing is that you won't make the same mistake again. And if you feel uncomfortable, you can tell me why you ate so many aura-converging pills. Don't tell me you never thought there would be problems." Yi Jinji paused for a moment, then answered honestly, "I think my cultivation speed is too slow, so I wanted to eat more medicinal pills to speed up my cultivation." Slow cultivation. Mo Tiange couldn't help but laugh. "You're only 12 years old, but you're already in the 3rd layer of the aura refining realm. How could it be slow?" "But Hualing is the same age as me, and he's already in the 5th layer of the aura refining realm." Hualing was the youngest disciple of Lord Taoist Jinghe's second disciple, Master Taoist Mingzhen. Because he was the same age as Yi Zhenji, he could be considered Yi Zhenji's little playmate. Mo Tiange smiled. Hualing is your martial uncle Mingzhen's blood-related descendant. His spiritual roots are also better than yours, and he's been carefully taught since he was a child. How could he be the same as you? Upon hearing what she said, Yi Zhenji pursed his lips and his gaze dimmed. I know my aptitude isn't comparable to his, but if that's the case, doesn't that mean I'll never be able to catch up to him for the rest of my life? Of course not. Mo Tiange stroked his head. On the path of cultivation, aptitude isn't enough. You might not be able to catch up to him now, but as long as you continue to cultivate earnestly, you'll eventually catch up. Besides, in the past 2 years, you've advanced 2 layers from the first layer to the 3rd layer, while Hualing barely advanced to the 5th layer a few days ago. What are you afraid of? Seeing that Yi Zhenji lowered his head and didn't say anything, Mo Tiange knew he was still unconvinced, so she said with a smile, "Then let's do it this way. You'll spend 10 years cultivating earnestly. Let's see if you'll build your foundation first or if he'll build it first. What do you think?" Yi Zhenji thought about it. He still had a high chance of advancing to the foundation building realm within 10 years, so he smiled and said, "But let's make this clear. You can't do things like you did today, pulling up seedlings to help them grow. Cultivation has to be done step by step. Being too impatient won't do you any good. If you're careless and end up suffering from qi deviation, you'll have to delay your cultivation for many years. The gains won't make up for the losses. All right, I'll listen to Annie." On the other side, Lord Taoist Jinghe had just finished his fight. His luxurious golden dragon robe had already been burnt to ashes, and his face was also stained with a lot of unknown ash or soil. Even half of his beautiful short beard was burnt. He was in a sorry state. He flew back to Clear Spring Peak angrily. As he flew, he muttered, "Old Taoist Xinyang, I gave you face today. If I used the Great Yang technique, even if you didn't die, you'd still be half dead. I'll let you off for the sake of us being fellow disciples." The old Taoist Xinyang he spoke of was currently directing his disciples to tidy up the cave with a dark expression. He himself called his youngest disciple over and locked him in a relatively intact stone room before he started scolding him. "Brat, you're too bored, aren't you? Instead of cultivating diligently, you went to seduce that old fool Qin Jinghe's disciple? You could have fallen for anyone, but that old fool is a complete scoundrel. If the upper beam is crooked, the lower beam will be crooked. How good can his disciple be? If you behave yourself, I'll forget about this matter." Bai Yin Fei was bewildered by his scolding. "Master, I told you about this." Lord Taoist Xinyang was stunned. "You told me? When did you tell me?" "Last time, when you were cultivating, I said I wanted to find someone to perform dual cultivation with, and you said I could do whatever I wanted." Thinking about it carefully, Lord Taoist Xinyang seemed to have said that. He couldn't help feeling embarrassed, but he still scolded him angrily. "I said you could do whatever you wanted, but you really did? There are many beautiful female cultivators with high cultivation levels in our sect. How did you fall for that old fool's disciple?" This time, he didn't even want to call him Qin Jinghe. He just directly called him old fool. Bai Yin Fei felt even more wronged. "I said I'd choose from the several martial uncles, but you agreed. I looked around, and only senior martial sister Mo was suitable, but you still didn't tell me." Lord Taoist Xinyang thought for a while, then said angrily, "Doesn't your martial uncle Miaoyi also have a girl? I remember she's not that old, and she's also suitable for you. Why didn't you choose her?" Bai Yin Fei cautiously looked at his master and said, "That senior martial sister Wu doesn't look too." He didn't finish a sentence, but how could Lord Taoist Xinyang not understand? Lord Taoist Xinyang glared at him. "You, as a cultivator, why are you so fixated on appearances? Whether they're beautiful or ugly, they're just bones under the skin. Besides, how ugly could a cultivator be? That old fool's disciple isn't that beautiful." Seeing his furious master, Bai Yin Fei cleverly shut his mouth and stopped talking. Now that his master had a falling out with martial uncle Jinghe, Saying anything more would only add fuel to the fire. Lord Taoist Jinyang paced around the room twice, then said, "Let's just forget about this matter. You don't need to think about this girl anymore. That old fool was prepared to give her to his boy. It's not your turn." Huh? Bai Yanfei was dumbfounded. "Master, what do you mean?" "What I mean is that girl belongs to Qin Shoujing. Do you understand now?" This news shocked Bai Yanfei, but he quickly shouted, "What does it have to do with him?" I asked, and Senior Marshal's sister, Mo, clearly has no intention of performing dual cultivation. "That's also none of your business." Lord Taoist Jinyang looked at his disciple and sneered. "All right, brat, be a bit smarter. I had a falling out with that old fool, but you still went to provoke his disciple. Are you trying to humiliate me? Let's just forget about this matter. If you want to perform dual cultivation, just pick someone else." Lord Taoist Jinyang swung his sleeves, then turned around and left the stone room. Although Bai Yanfei understood his master wasn't sneering at him, he still gnashed his teeth. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.